Chapter 620. For the next period of time, Su Zimo was like a mortal who accompanied Su Hong every day, chopping firewood, cooking and chatting. Su Zimo would accompany Su Hong for the last part of his journey. Su Zimo talked about his experiences over the years. He started from that night more than 20 years ago when he started cultivating under this peach blossom tree. He talked about Dai Yu Xiaoning Ji Yaoshua and Misty Peak. Bit by bit, he opened up his heart without hiding anything and spoke tirelessly. Su Hong had never heard of these things and was extremely curious. When he was excited, his mental state would improve significantly as well. Of course, as time passed by and the weather turned colder, Su Hong's health deteriorated and the time he spent awake was getting shorter. Instead, the time he spent unconscious was getting longer. He even said to Su Zimo half-jokingly, "Who knows, I might fall asleep like this one day and never wake up again." Su Zimo felt bitter in his heart and remained silent. When Su Hong was awake, Su Zimo could not bear to leave. He knew that the more time they spent together, the less time they had together. The more he said, the less he had to say. Su Zimo would only leave when Su Hong was unconscious. After leaving the mansion, Su Zimo would walk around Pingyang town in an uncertain direction. Occasionally, he would stop in his tracks and ponder for a long time. He walked extremely slowly, as though he was taking a casual stroll. However, if a discerning cultivator passed by, he would definitely notice that there was a trace of spirit qi emanating from Su Zimo's fingertips. It was like a carving knife that was carving something on the ground. A series of mysterious marks would appear on the ground behind him, as though they were the patterns of something. When the cold wind blew and dust swept past, those marks would be covered up easily. When he sensed that Su Hong was awake, Su Zimo would return to the mansion and continue chatting with Su Hong. He would only leave again when Su Hong fell into a deep sleep. It was the same day after day. Nothing seemed to have changed. However, Su Zimo could clearly sense that Su Hong's body was deteriorating. His lifespan was almost depleted and he was at the end of his life. This day, after Su Hong fell into a deep sleep once more, Su Zimo left the residence and took out 49 ancient flags from his storage bag. There were a total of 49 of them. The flagpole was made of wood, but it showed no signs of decay. It was unknown what kind of beast skin the flag was made of, but there were mysterious patterns carved on it that were extremely complicated. Just a casual glance at it would make one feel dizzy, as if it could pull one's mind into it. Su Zimo stepped into the air. Every time they arrived at a place, they would carefully examine it for a long time before throwing down a wooden flag. When the wooden flag fell, it would directly sink into the ground, flickering with a strange light before disappearing. One by one. By the time Su Zimo threw all 49 wooden flags onto the ground, he had already circled around Pingyang town. He looked exhausted and his forehead was covered in sweat. Although it seemed like a simple act of throwing the flags casually, it was extremely taxing on his mind. Right then, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and he returned to the mansion immediately. At that moment, Su Hong had already woken up. Today, Su Hong seemed to be in a much better state. However, Su Zimo felt a stab of pain in his heart. He knew very well that this was the final radiance of the setting sun. Su Hong smiled gently. "Zimo, warm a pot of wine for me to warm my body." "All right." Su Zimo came to Su Hong's side and started a fire in the furnace, boiling the water. There was a pot of wine in the boiling water. Su Hong said, "Zimo, I've been listening to you talk about immortal cultivation for the past few days. It's truly mysterious, magnificent and fascinating. It's great that you want to establish a Tao so that everyone can be like dragons. However, I can also tell that establishing a Tao is even harder than ascending to the heavens." "That's right." Su Zimo nodded. If one wanted to establish a Tao that was different from immortals, Buddhas and fiends, allowing all living beings without spirit roots to cultivate, even primordial emperors would not be able to do it, let alone a mere Jin Dan like Su Zimo. The future of this Tao was bleak and everything was unknown. Nobody could help him. From the moment he decided to establish a Tao, Su Zimo was destined to be alone. Of course, cows and sheep mostly traveled in herds. Only ferocious beasts traveled alone. Su Hong shouted, "How bold is it to want to change the fates of all living beings in the world? Zimo, whether you succeed or not, I'll be proud." Immediately after, There was a hint of loneliness in Su Hong's eyes as he sighed gently. It's just a pity that I won't be able to witness that moment. Also, you and Xiaoning have to live well when I'm not around. Brother. Su Zimo felt a lump in his throat and choked. Su Hong waved it off and pointed to the small furnace at the side. Pour me a bowl of wine. The wine flask was placed in the boiling water, and it began to emit a faint fragrance. The wine was ready. Suppressing the pain in his heart, Su Zimo poured a bowl of strong wine and handed it to Su Hong. Su Hong received it and looked at the fragrant wine in the bowl in a daze. In a daze, the clear water seemed to reflect a young man in bright clothes and riding a horse in high spirits. He wielded his spear and led the black-armored cavalry on the battlefield. Scenes flashed through the water surface one after another. A long time passed. A sparkling snowflake landed in the wine and bloomed, breaking the mirror-like water surface. It was snowing. The first snow of winter. Late autumn was over and early winter was coming, as though it was a sign of something. Just now the scenes had already disappeared. Only an old face was left on the water surface in the bowl. Su Hong smiled and raised his wine cup, downing it in a single gulp. After drinking that mouthful of strong wine, it was as though he had drunk his entire life. This wine is so fragrant. Su Hong roared in laughter and passed away. Su Zimo knelt on the ground with a thud and looked at the old man before him. He could no longer hold it in and tears gushed out like a fountain. In the end this day still came. Even though he was prepared, Su Zimo still felt a heart-wrenching pain the moment Su Hong left for real. He was filled with sorrow. The deeper one sank into their mortal ties, the harder it was to sever them. The deeper one sank, the more painful that slash would be. The skies gradually darkened. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Su Zimo knelt in front of Su Hong motionlessly with a dazed expression. He was a cultivator. Chapter 621. Dust billowed, the ground trembled and metal armor shone coldly. There was a large black mass of troops walking over slowly from afar, and they emanated an iron-blooded and murderous aura. At a glance it was a boundless ocean of people, and there were a few million of them. What was even more frightening was that the millions of soldiers were all cultivators. Those walking on the ground were all chi refinement warriors. Those with mounts were all foundation establishment cultivators. Above the vast army, spirit vessels tore through the air one after another. Some cultivators stood on the deck, facing the wind and looking down at the vast expanse. Those who could board the spirit vessels were all perfected Jin Dan. This was the allied army of the three dynasties. It was an army that was completely made up of cultivators led by the princes of the three dynasties. Everywhere they passed, none of the vassal states could defend against them. Furthermore, there were many Jining Jinjuan in the allied army. It was just that they rarely showed themselves. At the back of the allied army, a dilapidated city with bloodstains and thick smoke billowing could be vaguely seen. Jianan city of Yan country had already been reduced to ruins. Corpses were strewn all over the city and blood flowed like rivers. As the lord of Jianan city was in charge of the battle, he did not surrender. As a result, when the city was breached, all living beings in the city were massacred under the orders of the prince of the Great Xia dynasty. None of them were spared. As long as they did not surrender, the city would be massacred. Along the way, countless cities were trampled by the iron hooves of the allied army. Corpses piled up like mountains and blood flowed like rivers. This was a devastating disaster for all living beings in the world. Even if there were mortals who refused to submit, struggled and roared, it was useless. Some people chose to escape. However, it was easier said than done to escape. Given the frail bodies of mortals, how could they escape from the pursuit of cultivators? Even if they were lucky enough to escape from the pursuit of cultivators, in this chaotic world where bandits were everywhere, how long could these unarmed mortals survive? Hiding in the forests, even ferocious beasts without intelligence would be doomed, let alone spirit beasts and spirit demons. Their fates were already sealed. After the allied army of the three dynasties crossed the nearby Conglang mountain range, Pingyang town could not escape the same fate. The three princes of Great Xia, Great Shang and Great Yu were gathered on the grandest and largest spirit vessel. Not far away, many Jindan realm guards surrounded them. The security was tight. The three of them were drinking and chatting happily. The prince of the Great Xia dynasty had a plump figure. When he smiled, his eyes narrowed into slits that flickered with a cold glint. He said lecherously, "I heard from a spy that Ji Yaoshua is now in Songlang City. As long as we cross the mountain range ahead and cross a few small towns, we will be able to reach Songlang City." "Haha, Brother Ji, are you tempted?" The Prince of Great Shang was a refined man and asked with a faint smile. "Hey!" The Granxia Prince smiled and said, "That Ji Yaoshua can be considered a peerless beauty. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call her the #1 beauty of the 4 dynasties of the northern region. Who wouldn't want to get close to her? What's rare is that this woman is also the Empress of Great Zhou. If we can conquer her, this feeling..." The Great Yu Prince had a strong figure and grinned, licking his lips. The Prince of Great Shang smiled gently. "I won't fight with you 2 brothers. However, I heard that Ji Yaoshua has a younger sister who is also a beauty. I'm very interested." Ha 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 ha. The 3 of them exchanged glances and smiled happily. It was as though there was an ancient ferocious beast lying there with its mouth wide open, waiting for everyone to deliver themselves to it. It was a fleeting feeling that was like a sudden impulse. Frowning slightly, the skinny old man shook his head and continued to meditate with his eyes closed. The path in the mountain range was rugged and filled with ancient trees. Visibility was extremely low and the army advanced slowly. However, the allied army of the 3 dynasties did not encounter any danger along the way. The surroundings were silent. Everything was silent. Before long, the allied army of the 3 dynasties was already halfway into Songlang mountain range. The entire army let down their guard. The Prince of Great Yu laughed loudly. "Indeed, as you expected, the beasts in this mountain range are so scared that they don't dare to come out. Ha 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 ha. Something's wrong." Suddenly, a voice sounded from not far away. The skinny old man had a grim expression and his glabella shone. Gradually, he released his spirit consciousness and said in a deep voice, "It's too quiet around here. It's so quiet that it's eerie." Even if the demon beasts in Songlang mountain range were frightened and hid, it was impossible that they did not encounter a single demon beast along the way. It was as though all the beasts had hidden themselves a long time ago. Suddenly, the surrounding air froze. A killing intent filled the dark and sinister forest. Shoo! All of a sudden, the sound of a sharp blade tearing through the air sounded. Immediately after, there was a boom. Right in front of everyone, the spirit vessel at the front exploded as though it was struck by something. The gigantic spirit vessel was torn apart, and a few of the dozens of Jin Dan perfected beings on it died on the spot. Chapter 622. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A cold light flashed. Numerous sharp arrows shot out from the depths of the dark forest in front of them. They arrived in an instant and heavily collided with the spirit boat in mid-air. Bang, bang, bang. The spirit vessels exploded one after another. In midair, broken limbs flew everywhere and blood stained the skies. Before the perfected Jin Dan on the spirit vessel could react, they were smashed into a bloody mist by a tremendous force. Shards of the vessel flew everywhere and landed in the crowd, killing some of the unprepared Qi condensation and foundation establishment cultivators. The arrows were extremely fast and the cultivators present had already let down their guard and could not react in time. The army of the 3 dynasties was already in a mess. Even if the remaining spirit vessels were not attacked by the arrows, many perfected Jin Dan were scared out of their wits and hurriedly soared into the air, leaving the spirit vessels. Roar! Howl! Screech! All of a sudden, in the depths of the forest, a series of shuddering roars of demon beasts could be heard. An evil wind blew and the ancient trees swayed. The leaves rustled. In the distant skies, many birds tore through the air in a dense pack. It was as though all the birds and beasts in Songlang mountain range had appeared in an instant, forming a beast stampede that could devour everything and surge towards this place. The spirit vessel of the 3 princes was in the middle of the alliance army, and was not affected too much. At that moment, the 3 princes stood up one after another and looked over. They could see even more clearly from high up in the air. The entire Songlang mountain range was quaking. The demons were in a frenzy. Countless vegetation slanted and thousands of demon beasts surged over from all directions, forming a massive beast stampede with a frightening momentum that was extremely shocking. The 3 princes had terrible expressions. The Prince of Great Xia narrowed his eyes and asked in a deep voice, "How could this be?" Compared to the true forests of Tianhuang mainland, the great regions where demons resided and the 8 demon regions, Songlang mountain range was nothing. After all, no fiend demons were born in the mountain range for so many years. But now, a beast stampede suddenly broke out in the mountain range and attacked the Alliance army. It was abnormal no matter how one looked at it. The thin old man was Jining Jinjuan, the personal bodyguard of the prince of the Great Xia dynasty. At this moment, he was frowning and staring at the dark forest in front of him without saying a word. Not far away, the 2 personal bodyguards of the Great Yu and Great Shang princes, the 2 Jining Jinjuan, also appeared. One of them, a burly bald man in heavy armor, strode over and said in a deep voice, "A demon king should have been born in this mountain range." "That's right. It's only under the command of the demon king that the demon beasts in the mountain range would gather and form a beast stampede of such a scale." The other nascent soul was a white-bloused woman. "Don't worry, your highnesses. There are hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan with the army. Even if this monster king is a pure-blooded ominous beast, it will still die," the bald man said. The Prince of Great Shang had a dark expression as he suddenly asked, "Where is this demon king?" The bald burly man and white-bloused woman exchanged glances in uncertainty. Searching for a single monster beast in the dense beast stampede was akin to searching for a needle in a haystack. It was truly difficult. The thin old man looked ahead and suddenly said, "The beast stampede seems to be coming from all directions except for one direction. Right ahead." The princes and the others on the spirit vessel were not the only ones. Perfected Jin Dan, who was at the front, seemed to have sensed something as well as he glared at the dark forest with a grim expression. That was the direction where the arrow came from. It was dim in the forest. Many perfected Jin Dan could vaguely make out a blurry figure in the forest not far ahead that resembled a small mountain. "Who's there?" someone hollered. The moment he said that, the mountain suddenly moved. It rose continuously. The surrounding ancient trees swayed. In the blink of an eye, the mountain had surpassed the height of many ancient trees and was more than 100 feet tall. Everyone in the armies of the 3 dynasties subconsciously raised their heads to look. In the skies, a huge shadow blanketed over. That was not a mountain at all. It was clearly a humanoid ferocious beast that was slowly rising. It was tall and mighty and stood at the front like an unshakable iron tower. At that moment, the entire Songlang mountain range seemed to have become a foil. The massive ferocious beast's black hair danced wildly and demonic chi coiled around it like a fiend celestial. It looked down at the army of the 3 dynasties with a pair of scarlet eyes as streams of air spewed out of its mouth and nose. 2 balls of flame seemed to be reflected in those scarlet eyes. Pust! Many cultivators were scared out of their wits as they gasped. Countless war horses whined and knelt on the ground, peeing and shitting. Against this humanoid ferocious beast, all beasts had to bow, let alone mere war horses. Countless Foundation establishment cultivators fell from their war horses and the army was in chaos. Even Jining Zhenjuan was shocked when he saw that, let alone the low-level cultivators. It was way too ferocious. They could sense an intense killing intent from the humanoid ferocious beast. A ferocious aura that wanted to destroy the world and devour everything. They had seen many pure-blooded ferocious beasts up till this point of their cultivation. However, even the most ferocious pure-blooded demon beasts were like docile kittens compared to the ferocious beast before them. The one blocking the way was none other than Su Zimo, who had just experienced the pain of losing his family in his demon form. Roar! Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and his chest puffed up. Suddenly he opened his mouth and released a deafening roar with thunderclap kill. The weather changed. Boom! It was as though thunder had struck the ground. Under this tremendous roar, the roars of the beasts, the screeches of the birds, and the galloping of the demons seemed to have disappeared. Countless ancient trees were uprooted from the ground. At the front, perfected being Jin Dan's mind was blank. His gaze was blank and he stood motionlessly in midair. There was a pause. Poof! 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 Clouds of blood mist appeared one after another. It was as though fireworks were blooming. Against the impact of that terrifying sound, at least dozens of perfected being Jin Dan were turned into blood mists on the spot without any corpses left. Perfected being Jindan, who was slightly further away, had a dim gaze as well. Blood flowed from all 7 orifices and his life force was severed. Figures fell from midair one after another. The Allied army on the ground was in an even worse state. Countless Qi condensation and Foundation establishment cultivators were killed. With that roar, the beast stampede had already closed in and charged into the Allied army, unleashing a massacre. Spirit light filled the skies and spirit energy surged. Blood spewed and splattered all over the forest. Cultivators had weak physiques, and the greatest taboo against demon beasts was to allow them to get close to them. But now, countless demon beasts had charged into the crowd and killed everything with their sharp claws and teeth. Qi condensation and Foundation establishment cultivators could not defend against them at all. Furthermore, there were tens of millions of demon beasts in Songlang mountain range. There were several times more than the Allied army. In the skies, on the ground, in the mud, demon beasts were everywhere. Many different races of demonic beasts gathered together to form a huge force. Even perfected being Jindan would be doomed if a Jindan realm spirit demon closed in on him. In midair, only some perfected beings with Jindan phenomenons could hold on. However, the truly terrifying part was just beginning. The moment Su Zimo returned from the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and decided to strike, Songlang mountain range was destined to become hell for the Allied army. Chapter 623. Like an indomitable fiend celestial, Su Zimo swayed his massive body and took a step forward. Rumble! Bang! A blood-colored ravine that resembled a heavenly chasm was plowed out on the ground. Many Qi condensation and Foundation establishment cultivators could not dodge in time, and were trampled by Su Zimo's massive feet, turning into meat paste that was mixed into the mud. The entire mountain range shook with a single step. How dare you be so arrogant, beast! Kill! Swoosh! 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 Spirit lights flashed. Flying swords streaked everywhere. Many perfected Jindan cultivators attacked and summoned their flying swords. One after another, white lights descended like rain, piercing toward Su Zimo's body and arriving instantly. Although there were many perfected Jindan cultivators in the Allied army, their strength was far inferior to the paragons of the North region 20 years ago. Almost all of the flying swords used were superior grade as well. Even supreme grade spirit weapons were rare, let alone connate and perfect spirit weapons. Su Zimo did not dodge or even blink, allowing the white lights to pierce his body. Clang! 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 The sound of metal clashing echoed. Countless flying swords were repelled and could not pierce Su Zimo's body at all. Bang! 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 Su Zimo took 3 consecutive steps forward and rampaged. Countless towering ancient trees were uprooted from the ground and snapped on the spot. Many cultivators were trampled to death. Every time his massive feet stomped on the crowd, a large blood-colored region would appear where he was standing. Initially, there were millions of cultivators in the Allied army. However, they were scattered by Su Zimo's charge, and were split into several regions to fight for themselves. Coupled with the fact that the beast stampede was surging, the Allied army suffered heavy casualties after a brief exchange of blows. This was the hinterland of Songlang mountain range. Even if they wanted to retreat, they could not. Demon beasts were naturally savage and bloodthirsty. Now that there was a massacre, the demons were even more excited and their eyes were bloodshot. On the spirit vessel, the princes of the 3 dynasties frowned. The bald man said in a low voice, "Don't worry, Your Highness. This is just a Jindan realm spirit demon. Although it's a little big, it's nothing to be afraid of." Not bad. The white-clothed woman nodded and said, "The few top Jindan realm experts on the battlefield should be able to kill this demon with their Jindan phenomenon." Before he could finish his sentence, a few perfected Jindan cultivators had already killed several demonic beasts. They had already activated their movement techniques and charged towards Su Zimo. "Bastard, watch my Iron Chain River blockade!" the man shouted. Behind him, a huge river was surging and roaring, with raging waves crashing against the shore. A gigantic and thick chain crossed the river and whipped towards Su Zimo viciously. Boom! Boom! The other perfected Jindan cultivators also charged forward, and the power of their phenomena burst forth. Scram! Su Zimo roared as though he could devour mountains and rivers. He swung his gigantic fists and punched towards the few Jindan phenomenons in front of him. You don't know what's good for you. You're just a beast after all. To think that you would dare to take on Jindan phenomenons with your physical body. Splash. Blood gushed like a tsunami as his tendons and bones rang. Instantly, Su Zimo's punch released a bloody and tragic aura. Boom! There was a deafening sound. The void seemed to have stopped. Immediately after, the Jindan phenomenons in midair shattered. The few perfected Jindan cultivators were severely injured and their faces were pale gold. Spitting blood, they fell from midair and were most likely dead. The expressions of everyone on the spirit vessel changed. The strength of that demon beast had already exceeded their understanding. His physique was strong like diamond and was invulnerable to weapons, fire, and water. The few perfected Jindan cultivators joined forces and released their Jindan phenomenons, but they could not injure him at all. Instead, they were destroyed with a single punch. What kind of terrifying power was hidden in this body? Something's amiss. The Prince of Great Shang frowned with a grim expression. If this continues, the allied army of the three dynasties will be slaughtered by those beasts. Perfected lords, please make a move. Don't worry, Prince. I'll head over right now and chop off that beast's head. The bald burly man was murderous as he glared at Su Zimo in the distance and licked his lips. I'll go too, the white-bloused woman took the initiative to request. The two of you hold on. The skinny old man frowned slightly. Our mission is to protect the safety of the three princes. The other nascent souls will naturally deal with those beasts. There were more than 100 Jining Jinjuan cultivators in the allied army. At that moment, the commotion in Songlang mountain range had already alarmed the Jining Jinjuan cultivators. At the back of the army, figures soared into the air one after another with terrifying auras. They were much stronger than perfected Jindan cultivators and sped forward with sharp gazes. The skinny old man's gaze flickered as he said in a deep voice, "There's something strange about this. It's better to be cautious." Fufu. A look of mockery flashed through the bald burly man's eyes as he laughed. Fellow Taoist, aren't you being too cautious? How much trouble can a mere Jindan realm spirit demon cause? There's no need to argue, the Prince of Great Shang said indifferently. With 100 Jining Jinjuan cultivators attacking and enveloping the entire place with dermic powers, there's nothing to fear from those beasts. All we have to do is wait quietly. Where's that beast? The white-bloused woman exclaimed softly and suddenly asked, "What beast?" Everyone was stunned. Thereafter they gradually reacted. Just now, the indomitable humanoid ferocious beast that resembled an ancient demon had already vanished while everyone was conversing. Everyone looked around hurriedly. The battlefield was tragic and chaotic. There was no trace of the humanoid ferocious beast at all. How was that possible? It was extremely difficult to hide such a massive body. How could it vanish all of a sudden? The three princes were bewildered. The bald burly man frowned. "Princes, don't panic. Let me check with my spirit consciousness." The bald burly man's glabella shone as he released his spirit consciousness and extended it continuously. Vision was one of the five senses and had limitations. Once one's eyes were covered, they would not be able to see anything. If there were any obstacles ahead, they would block one's vision as well. That was the logic behind the saying, "A single leaf obscures one's vision." Just as he was pondering, he felt a shadow looming over from the corner of his eyes. A bone-chilling killing intent surged. Instantly, the black-robed cultivator felt as though he had fallen into an ice cellar. It was the humanoid ferocious beast. The ferocious beast had been hiding on the purple-winged eagle the entire time and only attacked when the corpse passed by the black-robed cultivator. The black-robed cultivator's flying sword was not with him. With a flustered expression, he conjured hand seals hurriedly and was about to release a dermic art to force the intruder back. Unexpectedly, the two of them were too close and the figure had already lunged before him in the blink of an eye. The intruder reached out with both hands and gripped the black-robed cultivator's shoulders, channeling strength through his fingers. Exclamation point! The fingernails on his fingertips were as sharp as daggers, piercing the black-robed cultivator's flesh and bones instantly. Ah! The black-robed cultivator shrieked in pain and cold sweat dripped down instantly. Before he could react, the intruder had already bent his knees and charged forward like a galloping horse. Bang! The black-robed cultivator's chest caved in deeply and his eyes bulged. With a ripping sound, both his arms were ripped off. A blood mist spewed out. Another Jining Xinjuan was dead. Beast, how dare you! The other Jining Xinjuan reacted and were enraged. Hurriedly, they summoned their dermic weapons and chased after the intruder. Under the night sky, the black figure killed the black-robed cultivator and did not pause in midair. Instead, it turned into a streak of light and burrowed into the forest at the side. After twisting and turning, it charged into the beast's stampede and disappeared again before long. Many Jining Zhenjuan chased after the intruder but found nothing. All of them had terrible expressions. In their rage, many Jining Zhenjuan attacked one after another. They released dermic arts and summoned their dermic weapons, raising the surrounding ancient trees to the ground. Countless demon beasts in the vicinity died. On the spirit vessel, the Prince of Great Xia was a little anxious and could not help but ask, "Where did that beast go? We can't let it escape just like that." The white-bloused woman frowned slightly and said in confusion, "For some reason, my spirit consciousness can't lock onto that person's tracks. The moment my spirit consciousness extended, it was isolated." "I have the same feeling as well." The bald burly man nodded. Everyone looked at the skinny old man instinctively. Among the three of them, the skinny old man was the most experienced and had the highest cultivation. "There are only two possibilities," the skinny old man said deeply. "First, that demon beast cultivated some sort of demonic secret skill that can isolate spirit consciousness. Second, that demon beast has some sort of treasure that can isolate spirit consciousness." The white-bloused woman and bald burly man nodded in deep thought. A cold glint flashed through the skinny old man's eyes as he said in a deep voice, "That demon beast's cultivation realm isn't high. It's unrealistic for it to cultivate such a demonic technique. I'm guessing that there should be a treasure on that demon beast." The hearts of the white-bloused woman and bald burly man skipped a beat as greed flashed through their eyes. To them, such a treasure was also something that was hard to come by. The skinny old man was not wrong. The humanoid ferocious beast that killed two Jining Zhenjuan consecutively was Su Zimo. The treasure that the skinny old man mentioned was none other than the Mingwang prayer beads. Although Su Zimo was a dual immortal and demon cultivator, be it immortal or demon, he had yet to cultivate an essence spirit. His true strength was not even comparable to Jining Zhenjuan. Furthermore, he was facing more than 100 Jining Zhenjuan. He would be courting death if he tried to fight them head-on. His advantage was his melee combat strength. Su Zimo made use of the complicated environment of Tsonglang Mountain Range, the Dark Night, the Mingwang prayer beads, his transformation and many other methods to kill the two Jining Zhenjuan. Although the process was simple, life and death happened in the span of a breath. However, Su Zimo was the only one who knew the dangers involved. If he was a step slower or made a mistake, he would be locked down by the 100 Jining Zhenjuan and killed on the spot. Furthermore, after killing two Jining Zhenjuan consecutively, the remaining cultivators were on high alert. Any slight movement would lead to a thunderous attack. Late night had passed. The skies were gradually brightening. It was almost impossible for them to launch a sneak attack. Su Zimo hid in the depths of the forest, almost blending into his surroundings. He looked at the largest spirit vessel in midair with a cold expression. However, his eyes were cold and murderous as usual. The person who had arrived was not General Sun, but Su Zimo, who had changed his appearance. Almost everyone's attention was focused on the outside. No one had expected that Su Zimo would send himself to their doorsteps. The white-bloused woman froze for a moment. That single mistake was the difference between life and death. In melee combat, such a mistake was equivalent to courting death in the eyes of Su Zimo. Su Zimo reached out and slapped the white-bloused woman's head. There was a bang. The white-bloused woman's head shattered and her brain juice splattered. Her essence spirit was also shattered and she was destroyed on the spot. The thin old man and bald burly man reacted right away. The bald burly man was a body-tempered cultivator to begin with, and he was even more pleased to see Su Zimo close in. His bloodline surged. The bald burly man punched towards Su Zimo's head viciously. His fist was like a meteorite that arrived with an unparalleled aura. However, The thin old man was even more experienced and retreated right away. As long as he could distance himself, he would be in an invincible position. At the same time, the thin old man conjured hand seals and conjured a dermic art. Dermic powers surged. A thick finger was formed rapidly, like a heavenly stone pillar. It burst forth with terrifying power and smashed toward Su Zimo's chest. OM. At the same time, Su Zimo suddenly spoke. The damning mantra was released. Sanskrit reverberated through the world and reverberated endlessly, bursting forth with immense might. The first to suffer were none other than the dynasty's imperial army soldiers near the deck. Cling! Clang! Clang! Many of the imperial army soldiers let out pained expressions as their weapons fell to the ground one after another. Piak! 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 Cracks appeared on the protection jade talismans of the three princes. They were shattered by the Sanskrit sound. As for the thin old man, his body shuddered and he frowned slightly with a look of pain in his eyes. Although he was Jining Jinjuan, he was not a body-tempered cultivator and could not withstand the Sanskrit sound as such. In midair, the dermic power finger that was formed earlier dissipated slightly, and its might was reduced as well. The bald burly man was the least affected by the Sanskrit sound. The bald burly man's fist did not stop at all. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he opened his mouth once more. The second Sanskrit sound descended. Bang! 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 Most of the Imperial Army soldiers on the spirit vessel collapsed stiffly with blood oozing out of their 7 orifices. They died tragically and their minds were already blasted into mush. The 3 princes were pale and slumped to the ground weakly as well. In midair, the dermic power finger that was charging over swayed, and its might was greatly reduced. The thin old man staggered for a moment. However, he was fearless. The distance between them had already increased. Furthermore, Su Zimo had to deal with his dermic art and the bald burly man's melee combat. There was no chance for the latter to get close to him. All of a sudden, he caught sight of a ball of light from the corner of his eye. Instinctively, the thin old man raised his head and looked over. Not far away, Su Zimo's right eye shone with a bedazzling light. It was like a blazing sun that illuminated the entire world as though it was daytime. Illumination eye. Boom! An incomparably blinding beam of light shot out and tore through the void, entering the thin old man's face. At that moment the world went silent. Light shone brightly. The next moment the light dissipated. Night enveloped the world once more. On the spirit vessel, the thin old man's body was twitching uncontrollably. All that was left of his face was a round hole that connected his front and back. His facial features were gone and the area around the wound was charred. His head was penetrated by just now's white beam of light. His essence spirit did not even have a chance to escape before it dissipated. In the blink of an eye, 2 Jining Jinjuan on the spirit vessel were dead. Chapter 626. Although the skinny old man was dead, Su Zimo could not avoid the dermic power finger conjured by the skinny old man despite his continuous attacks. Bang! Su Zimo shuddered and his organs were shaken violently. Fresh blood gushed up and stuck in his throat. With his cultivation at Jindan realm, he would have to face immense danger if he wanted to kill Jining Jinjuan. Thankfully, Su Zimo released the damning mantra consecutively and reduced the power of the skinny old man's dermic art. Otherwise, he would have been severely injured with that single attack. Dermic power was the power of heaven and earth and contained the might of heaven and earth. It was not something that ordinary people could defend against. Right now, although Su Zimo's organs were shaken, his physique was strong and his regeneration capabilities were terrifying. He could still suppress such injuries. At the same time, the bald burly man had a menacing gaze and his fist was already descending. In his heart, even if Su Zimo was at his peak, he would definitely kill him with a single punch, let alone the fact that he was injured. After all, he was a nascent soul-body tempered warrior. Su Zimo's eyes lit up and shone with a ferocious glint. His blood chi surged and the roar of dragons and tigers could be heard. His tendons and bones buzzed as though metal was clashing. Su Zimo did not dodge or retreat and punched out as well. Bang! The 2 fists collided. Blood, flesh and bones collided with each other, emitting a dull sound that made one's teeth ache. The bald, burly man's expression changed in shock. He could sense a ferocious power surging through the other party's fist like a tsunami that was about to engulf him. Not good. That man's physique is extremely strong. The bald, burly man was alarmed. Although Su Zimo's cultivation realm was not at nascent soul realm, his frightening physique, power of blood qi and melee combat capabilities had already surpassed ordinary Jining Zhenjuan. If a Jining Zhenjuan from Glass Palace who was famous for body tempering appeared and fought against Su Zimo, his life or death would be unknown. Moreover, this bald man was just an ordinary body refiner. In other words, not to mention the current Su Zimo, even if it was Wuxia who had fallen at his hands, the bald man wouldn't be able to gain the slightest advantage in close combat. If not for the fact that Su Zimo was hit by the thin old man's spell first, the outcome of that punch would have been decided. Now, after just one head-on collision, the bald man realized that something was wrong. Borrowing the power of Su Zimo's punch, the bald man took advantage of the momentum to retreat. He wanted to increase the distance between them, condense a spell, and then kill Su Zimo. Su Zimo noticed the bald man's actions. His eyes flickered and he frowned slightly. Although he had killed 2 Jining Zhenjuan in a row, the situation was extremely unfavorable for him. Furthermore, the longer he delayed, the more dangerous his situation would be. Jining Zhenjuan, who was nearby, had begun to notice what was going on. He had to kill this burly bald-headed man with a thunderous momentum. But now that the bald man had retreated with the momentum of the clash, Su Zimo was already a step slower and it was too late for him to give chase. Suddenly, Su Zimo had an idea and opened his mouth. Exclamation point. Using the immense power of his organs and tongue, Su Zimo spat out the blood in his throat. Like a blood arrow, it shot towards the bald man's face. The damning mantra had little effect on the bald man. However, that blood arrow could not be ignored. The power of sound alone could kill perfected being Jin Dan. That blood arrow had already condensed into a corporeal form, and its might was imaginable. The bald man's eyelids twitched. Unable to dodge in time, he could only reach out to block instinctively. Bang! The blood arrow hit his palm, sending a heart-wrenching pain. Although his core was not injured, the bald man was shocked. If he really turned a blind eye to this blood arrow and did not dodge, his face would be smashed into a bloody mess, and his face would be unrecognizable. The bald man felt slightly relieved. However, before he could catch his breath, he caught sight of a figure moving from the corner of his eyes. The bald man's heart sank. The next moment he felt a strong killing intent surge towards him. He felt his scalp prickle and his hair stand on end. That blood arrow is only a feint. The bald man felt chills run down his spine. A figure that resembled an ancient fiend celestial had already arrived before him. Reaching out with a gigantic palm that covered the skies, it slammed down viciously at his head. Die! Su Zimo's ferocity was torrential and his gaze was like lightning as he hollered. The bald man did not have time to gather dermic powers at all, and could only channel his bloodline. Crossing his arms, he blocked Su Zimo's heaven-encompassing palm. Bang! Both sides collided head-on. The bald man's expression changed starkly as a piercing pain shot through his arms. Immediately after, he lost all feeling in his arms. The bald man merely felt a boundless power that suppressed him endlessly. It was as though the heavens were collapsing, and he could not defend against it at all. The might of the heavens collapsing was not something a human could defend against. Thud! The bald man knelt on the ground and his knees were almost shattered. At that moment, the surrounding cultivators had already noticed what happened. When they saw that, they could not help but gasp. Jining Zhenjuan was forced to kneel on the ground forcefully. Right in front of everyone, the bald man's body was trembling slightly under Su Zimo's palm. He was like an ant that was struggling to survive. Petty and insignificant. As for Su Zimo, he stood firmly on both feet. His black hair danced wildly and his eyes shone brightly. He was like an enraged ancient god with a torrential aura that was insufferably arrogant. He suppressed Jining Zhenjuan with a single palm strike with his Jin Dan realm cultivation. Who else in history could do that? Su Zimo's gaze was cold as he extended his leg and tapped the bald man's chest. Bearing Su Zimo's palm, the bald man's body could no longer bear the burden and his bones creaked as though they could fall apart at any moment. He could not dodge Su Zimo's leg when he saw it. Snap! The bald man's chest caved in immediately. The bones in his chest shattered and the broken bones pierced his organs and heart, severing his life. The blood chi in the bald man's body deteriorated rapidly. Opening his mouth, he spat out blood and his eyes were lifeless. His glabella shone. A ball of light appeared. The bald man's essence spirit left his body in an attempt to escape. Ma! Su Zimo chanted in Sanskrit. The damning mantra descended once more. The bald man's essence spirit shuddered and its light dimmed. Jining Zhenjuan's essence spirit was filled with impurities, and was the weakest. After his essence spirit left his body, he would not be able to withstand the sun and rain. In light cases he would be injured and fall seriously ill. In severe cases his essence spirit would die outside. Only after advancing to the void reversion realm could one's essence spirit leave at any time and soar through the world without fear of the astral winds or blazing sun. Although the bald man's body could withstand the might of the damning mantra, his essence spirit could not. The moment the Sanskrit descended, his essence spirit was destroyed on the spot. Su Zimo's palm pressed down with the momentum. Boom! The bald man's body was pressed onto the deck of the spirit vessel by Su Zimo. His tendons and bones were crushed and he turned into a pool of blood. His essence spirit was destroyed. A clear blood-colored palm print appeared on the deck and sank deeply. The material of the spirit vessel was made of superior-grade steel, and was even tougher than superior-grade spirit weapons. But now a mark was left behind by Su Zimo's palm. Roar! Su Zimo stood up. His palm was still stained with Jining Zhenjuan's blood, and he exuded a shuddering aura. Surveying his surroundings with a frightening gaze, he let out a deafening roar. Roar! 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 Immediately after, beasts roared and demons howled. Instantly demonic chi surged into the skies and the mountains and rivers changed. Chapter 627. Initially, the beast stampede was on the verge of defeat against the killing of the many Jining Zhenjuan. But now, Su Zimo had appeared and killed the 3 Jining Zhenjuan on the spirit vessel with a thunderous might. Blood stained the firmaments and a torrential ferocity caused the morale of the demons to surge. Thousands of demons roared in the mountains. The beast stampede that was about to be defeated gathered once more, forming a torrent that surged towards the allied army of the 3 dynasties. Blood and killing were everywhere. The reason why the demon beasts of Tsonglang mountain range were so united was not only because they were afraid of Su Zimo's strength. It was also because the flesh and blood of cultivators were extremely nourishing for them. There were millions of cultivators in the allied army of the 3 dynasties. Up till this point of the battle, corpses were strewn everywhere and blood flowed like rivers. Such a massive life force essence would definitely cause a qualitative change. After this battle, there was a high chance that fiend demons would be born in Tsonglang mountain range. Demon beasts possessed sentience as well, and everyone wanted to become that fiend demon. Prior to this, the 100 Jining Zhenjuan had expanded their search radius continuously in order to search for Su Zimo's whereabouts, and were gradually distancing themselves from the spirit vessel. Even if they discovered what was happening on the spirit vessel, it was already too late to save it. The 3 Jining Zhenjuan had died way too quickly. It took less than 5 breaths from start to finish. You are. The Prince of Great Xia seemed to have recognized something and his eyes were filled with fear as he pointed at Su Zimo with a trembling voice. That person's appearance, Su Zimo. You're Su Zimo. The Prince of Great Xia shrieked and the fats on his face quivered. Back then, the 3 dynasties sent their armies to the Great Qian ruins. The Prince of Great Xia was one of them and was fortunate enough to witness that earth-shaking battle. Although the strongest monster incarnate in history had already died after leaping down the Dragon Burial Valley, that face was like a nightmare that lingered on. Su Zimo. The moment that name was mentioned, it caused an uproar. How is that possible? Didn't that person jump down the Dragon Burial Valley in front of everyone and die with his Jin Dan destroyed and his inner core shattered? It seems to be him. Back then I saw him from afar. This monster actually didn't die? The hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan were also shocked, their eyes filled with bewilderment. It should be pointed out that 20 years ago, in that great battle between prodigies, it was not only Jin Dan realm prodigies who perished. Even Jining Xinjuan, who had shown up at that time, was completely annihilated. He was burned to ashes by the fire, and his body and soul were destroyed. The intensity of that battle was rarely seen since ancient times. No one would have thought that this person who had already fallen would actually be alive, and standing in front of everyone. None of the Jining Zhenjuan sensed any spiritual energy fluctuations from Su Zimo. One of them said coldly, "Good, good, good. Looks like you've completely turned into a demon. If they are not of our race, we shall kill them together." In the face of Jining Zhenjuan's threat, Su Zimo remained fearless. He turned his gaze and looked at the three trembling princes on the deck. The three princes shuddered. The prince of Great Xia was in an even worse state. His lower body was wet and a stench filled the air. He was so scared that he peed and pooped. "Su Zimo, how dare you injure the three princes? You'll definitely die today," one of the Jining Zhenjuan hollered. Many Jining Zhenjuan headed over and gradually formed a circle. However, the three princes were on the spirit vessel and none of them dared to attack recklessly for fear of breaking the vases. The Prince of Great Yu was no longer as ferocious as before. Terrified, he asked with a trembling voice, "Su Zimo, we have no feud with you. Why did you do such a thing?" "No feud?" Su Zimo smiled and pointed to the ground beneath his feet, asking instead, "Do you guys know where this is?" "To this is Tsonglang Mountain Range," the Prince of Great Xia answered hurriedly, afraid that he would die here if he was too slow. "That's not right," shaking his head, Su Zimo said. "This is the Yin country. The three dynasties sent millions of troops to invade the homeland of the Yin country and massacred countless citizens of the Yin country. Yet, you say that you have no feud with me? If you spare our lives, I'll give the order to retreat right now." Among the three princes, the Prince of Great Shang was the only one who could maintain his composure and said in a deep voice, "Retreat? Ha!" Su Zimo laughed. "There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world." The Prince of Great Shang grit his teeth and asked, "What do you want?" Su Zimo looked at the dilapidated Jian and city that was still shrouded in smoke. How many people died under the merciless hooves of the army in this piece of land? How many people died in the chaos of war? Su Zimo retracted his gaze and looked at the three princes, asking coldly, "Who's going to pay for their lives?" Su Zimo's tone was calm. However, the more that was the case, the more afraid the three princes were. Beneath that seemingly frail appearance was a fiend demon that could devour humans at any moment. "Fellow Taoist, you're a cultivator." The Prince of Great Shang was smart, and did not expose Su Zimo's identity as a demon at that moment for fear of agitating the latter. The Prince of Great Shang gulped and composed himself before continuing, "Since you're a cultivator, you've already shed your mortal body and severed your ties with the mortal world. What do the lives of the people in the world have to do with you, fellow Taoist? In other words, how many people can survive in the flames of war in the North region? Are you going to interfere in all of this? Are you going to save all of them?" "You're right," Su Zimo nodded. When he heard that, the Prince of Great Shang felt relieved. In their emotions, the princes of Great Xia and Great Yu were so touched that they nearly cried. However, suddenly, Su Zimo changed the topic and said indifferently, "My brother is dead and I'm very sad and angry. Therefore I want to kill. I want you guys to be buried with him." The moment he said that, the three princes felt as though they had fallen into an ice cellar and chills ran down their spines. This reason seemed so simple and so absurd. However, it was hard to defend. Su Zimo. Sensing a strong sense of danger, the Prince of Great Shang could not help but shout, "There are 100 nascent souls here and your tracks are already exposed. If you harm us, you won't be able to escape either." Although the Prince of Great Shang was calm and used both carrot and stick, he did not realize how terrifying a person he was facing. This person was fearless and decisive in killing. How could that person's boldness be intimidated by Jining Zhenjuan? "Is that so?" Su Zimo grinned. "I'd like to give it a try." Boom! Su Zimo's gaze was ferocious as he raised his leg and stomped on the deck, causing a deafening sound to erupt. The spirit vessel shook violently. On the deck, one could clearly see cracks spreading on the spot where Su Zimo stood, increasing in speed and density. Boom! There was another deafening sound. Su Zimo stomped his foot once more. The spirit vessel exploded and shards flew everywhere. The massive spirit vessel was destroyed by Su Zimo with a single stomp. Su Zimo descended rapidly and flicked his sleeves casually. Countless shards shot out in front of him and entered the three princes' bodies densely. Poof! 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 Blood mist spewed out of the three princes' bodies and they were almost riddled with holes. Their life force was severed, and they were already dead before they landed on the ground. The princes of the three dynasties are dead. This forest will be your burial ground. Su Zimo's voice spread through the surroundings in a cold and sinister manner. Chapter 628. Be *starred, you have a death wish. Many Jining Zhenjuan hollered and attacked one after another. In midair, dermic powers were torrential. Many dermic arts collided and let out a series of deafening sounds. Dermic weapons descended. The might of heaven and earth enveloped Songlang mountain range, causing the entire mountain range to quake violently. Mountain peaks collapsed, gravel rolled, ancient trees shattered and dust billowed. It was as though the end of the world had arrived. All the Jining Zhenjuan present were truly enraged. Su Zimo had killed the three princes right in front of them. That was equivalent to disregarding them. Furthermore, the death of the three princes meant that the allied army of the three dynasties had suffered heavy losses. Even if they were still alive, they could only retreat. This expedition against Zhou was a failure at the last step. After Su Zimo killed the three princes, he did not linger and had long fled. The inner core in Su Zimo's chest turned wildly and his blood chi surged. His figure descended rapidly like an anaconda, sticking close to the ground and scurrying towards the depths of the forest. His movement technique was extremely agile. His terrifying spirit perception spread out. He fled with all his might. Bang! 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 Swoosh! 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 The sounds of dermic art striking echoed repeatedly in his ears. Dermic weapons tore through the air with cold flashes. Hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan chased after him. Any mistake and he would die on the spot. A dermic art descended. Su Zimo's tendons and bones rang at the same time. His body contorted beyond the limits of an ordinary person, and he dodged the dermic art by a hair's breadth. Bang! The rocks from the explosion of the dermic art smashed heavily onto Su Zimo's back. Su Zimo coughed out a mouthful of blood, but he did not stop at all. At that moment he would die on the spot if his movement technique slowed down at all. Exclamation point! A flying sword streaked past. A bloody wound appeared on Su Zimo's thigh. However, there was no emotion in his eyes. It was as though he could not feel any pain. While Su Zimo was fleeing, he adjusted his muscles to close the two sides of the wound, temporarily stopping the bleeding. He continued to run, his speed already reaching the limit. To be fair, this was only because they were in the Songlang mountain range, where the sky was dark and the terrain was complicated. Hills, forests, bushes, caves. There were too many places to hide. However, Su Zimo cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. Coupled with the fact that he had lived in Songlang mountain range for a year many years ago, he knew this place like the back of his hand. That was why he was able to survive for so long despite being chased by hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan. There were even a few times when he almost completely shook off the Jining Zhenjuan behind him. However, as time passed, Su Zimo's situation became more and more dangerous. He was injured. Such a stressful escape had consumed a lot of his energy, and he had no time to recover. In the long run, his speed would definitely slow down. Moreover, it was already late at night. As the skies gradually brightened, the vision of the hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan increased significantly as well. Once they surrounded him, he would not be able to escape even if he had wings. Beast, you'll definitely die today. The hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan had cultivated for hundreds of years and were experienced. They could naturally tell the current situation. In my opinion, we should capture this beast alive. That's right. I believe that there are definitely many sects and factions in the north region that are interested in this lad. The hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan believed that victory was in their hands and began discussing. After all, Su Zimo had way too many secrets. He had once entered the human emperor's palace, and was the second person in history to cultivate to the extreme foundation establishment realm. He was the only one who knew the secret of the Extreme Foundation establishment realm. Furthermore, this lad possessed the legendary treasure, the divine phoenix bone. The eyes of the hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan shone with excitement. As a matter of fact, at their level of cultivation, the contest of the kingdom was no longer attractive to them. Although they had failed to conquer Zhou this time round, if they could capture Su Zimo alive and obtain treasures such as the divine phoenix bone, this trip would definitely be worth it. I'm rather curious though. How can there be a demon cultivation technique in this world that's suitable for humans? One of the Jining Zhenjuan lamented. The eyes of the other perfected lords flickered, but none of them said anything. In reality, everyone had a tacit understanding. Although Su Zimo had many secrets and treasures, the most valuable one was that unknown demon cultivation technique. Everyone witnessed with their own eyes how Su Zimo managed to kill 5 nascent souls, who were a major cultivation realm above him after cultivating that cultivation technique. Although it was a sneak attack that caught them off guard, it was still frightening enough. Furthermore, Su Zimo's movement speed was not inferior to Jining Zhenjuan's. His stamina and blood qi were shocking. One party chased while the other fled. To the shock of the Jining Zhenjuan, the forest before them was gradually thinning out. Everyone looked into the distance. The path ahead was clear. Haha, that lad is in a panic and has already escaped from this mountain range. The perfected lords roared in laughter and chased relentlessly. Leaving the forest meant that Su Zimo had given up on his final hope of escaping. The perfected lords watched as Su Zimo sprinted into a small town closest to Conglang mountain range. He ran into a mansion and entered a room without emerging again. Everyone stop. Don't be careless. There must be a reason why that lad escaped here. Another person stopped everyone with a suspicious gaze. Brotherly, you've overestimated that lad. Someone at the side chuckled. Guys, look at what's in that mansion. A corpse? Someone exclaimed in realization. I've got it. That corpse must be that lad's elder brother. That's right. That lad knew that he had nowhere to run and returned here. He must have wanted to die together with his elder brother. A Jining Zhenjuan said confidently. As the saying goes, fallen leaves return to their roots. If I'm not wrong, this small town should be the birthplace of that lad. That's extremely likely. Let's go. The Jining Zhenjuan barged into the small town with a sharp aura. With such a huge commotion, the mortals who were still in the town had long woken up. Everyone looked terrified and hid in their houses, not daring to make a sound. Granny, what are you afraid of? A tender voice of a child sounded from a dilapidated house. Although the voice was weak, the Jining Zhenjuan in midair heard it clearly. Shoo! The old woman raised her finger hurriedly and whispered, Child, don't speak. Be careful that the immortals punish you and you won't be able to live. Why? The child blinked his big eyes and asked in confusion, What did I do wrong? Why would the immortals punish me? Sigh, there's no reason for the immortals to punish you. The old woman sighed. A few decades ago, there was a scholar in this town who was almost burned to death because he didn't kneel down and worship the immortals. The child seemed to be frightened and cried out in surprise. The old woman quickly covered the child's mouth and broke out in cold sweat. The old woman slowly let go. The child was deep in thought. After a while he whispered, Granny, there are good and bad immortals too. Those immortals who kill people indiscriminately are bad immortals. There was a loud boom. The roof over the old woman and the child's heads was suddenly lifted. Hundreds of powerful figures stood in the air and looked down at the two of them with cold expressions. The old woman hugged the child tightly. Her eyes were filled with fear and her body trembled. One of the Jining Zhenjuan's eyes was ferocious. He said coldly, Talking about immortals behind their backs is a capital offense. Right at this moment, with a creak, the door of a room in a nearby mansion opened, and a scholar with delicate features walked out. He wore a green robe and was upright. Chapter 629. The scholar had changed into a clean set of green robes and pushed open the door. It was Su Zimo who had fled all the way here. The attention of the 100 Jining Zhenjuan was drawn over instantly. In the dilapidated house, the old woman could not see what was happening outside. She merely hugged the child tightly and tried her best to protect him. Little beast, you're finally willing to show yourself? The many Jining Zhenjuan stood in the air and looked down at the mansion not far away, either sneering or mocking. With an indifferent expression, Su Zimo walked down the stone steps and arrived in the courtyard. He looked at the old man under the peach blossom tree quietly with a hint of sorrow in his eyes. The old man's eyes were tightly shut and he had a serene expression, as though he was in a deep sleep. The fire in the red clay stove was not extinguished and flickered. There was still a bowl of wine left on top of it that was still warm. The 100 Jining Zhenjuan surrounded him, but Su Zimo ignored them. He walked to the side of the stove and raised the bowl of wine, downing it in a single gulp. This wine is so fragrant, Su Zimo murmured softly. That was Su Hong's final sentence. The multitude of living beings floated in the sea. Some came for benefits, some went for benefits. Even cultivators were no exception. They either sought power or longevity. How many of them could be as carefree and open-minded as Su Hong? Beast! One of the Jining Zhenjuan hollered. If you surrender and hand over the divine phoenix bone obediently and the cultivation technique of the demon race that you're cultivating, we might leave you with an intact corpse. Otherwise, I'll burn your brother's corpse to ashes. Su Zimo remained silent and merely looked at the 100 Jining Zhenjuan with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Another Jining Zhenjuan laughed sinisterly. Also, from today onwards, there won't be a single soul left in this place. His voice echoed throughout the entire Pingyang town. Cries of surprise could be heard from the tile-roofed houses. In some mansions there were even faint sobbing sounds of women and children crying. A sense of fear permeated Pingyang town and grew in everyone's hearts. In the broken roof of the house, the old woman gently stroked the child's back and comforted him in a low voice, but 2 lines of hot tears flowed down her face. The lives of mortals were like grass. In front of a cultivator, they had no power to resist at all. This was their fate. There was nothing they could do. An old man with a walking stick walked out of the room shakily. He knelt down toward the powerful figures in the air and said sorrowfully, "Exalted immortal, please take pity on me. I'm already on the verge of death and won't live for long. I'm at Exalted Immortal's disposal, and I can die without regrets. However, there are more than 3,000 women and children in Pingyang town. Exalted Immortal, please take pity on them and give them a way out." The old man's heart was weeping blood, his expression sorrowful and moving. However, the hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan looked indifferent. Some of them ignored him, some of them had a look of mockery in their eyes, and some of them even sneered. "Noisy!" One of the Jining Zhenjuan hollered impatiently. The old man felt his ears buzzing and his head spinning. He fell to the ground choking. "Ha ha ha!" The Jining Zhenjuan roared in laughter. "If you want to blame someone, blame this town for giving birth to a monster incarnate, a beast. He's the one who implicated you." Heis! Right at this moment, a faint sigh sounded from the courtyard. "Since you're here, don't leave." Su Zimo said indifferently, "Activate." Buzz! Whoosh! Bang! 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 Instantly the world quaked. Above the firmaments, astral winds howled and lightning flashed. The light of the stars and moon was dazzling. Instantly a terrifying and sinister power descended and shrouded Pingyang town. The hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan in midair discovered to their horror that they could not mobilize their essence spirits. There was an extremely strange power that was restraining his primordial spirit. The reason why the Jining Zhenjuan was strong was because they could mobilize heaven and earth powers after cultivating their essence spirits. In other words, it was the legendary dermic power. The foundation of many dermic weapons and dermic arts was the essence spirit. Once the essence spirit was restrained, it was equivalent to crippling the Jining Zhenjuan's strongest means. "It's an array formation. It's an array formation." One of the Jining Zhenjuan shouted in a panic. "Shut up!" Another person hollered. "Everyone can tell that this is an array formation. But what is it exactly?" Given their knowledge, they naturally knew that they had fallen into an ambush when such a phenomenon occurred. One of the Jining Zhenjuan took a deep breath of air and tried his best to compose himself, saying in a deep voice, "I've dabbled in array formations. If I'm not wrong, this should be an ancient spirit lock formation from the ancient era. However, this ancient formation has been lost. How could it? All of a sudden, clouds rose around the town. Standing in Pingyang town, they could no longer see anything outside. The town was completely isolated. Another great formation? This should be a trap formation to prevent us from leaving. What? How dare he? What is he trying to do? Even if our essence spirits are restrained, we can still control our spirit energy. How can he fight against us alone if we join forces? Before he finished his sentence, a bedazzling light shone brightly in Pingyang town. One after another, light screens shone with mysterious patterns etched on them. Ah, the third formation. Not good, our spirit energy is restrained as well. It's the ancient spirit lock formation. Many Jining Xinjuan's expressions changed and they could no longer control their bodies, falling from midair one after another. This time round, everyone was truly flustered. One was the ancient spirit lock formation and the other was the ancient spirit lock formation. They were almost crippled. Coupled with the trapping formation, Pingyang town was a cage. Of the three formations, only the trap formation and the ancient spirit lock formation were set up by Su Zimo in his free time while accompanying Su Hong. As for the ancient spirit lock formation, given his cultivation realm, he could not comprehend it nor could he set it up. The reason why he could activate the ancient formation was because of the 49 formation flags that were taken from the ancient temple at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. The set of formation flags belonged to the Great Qian Palace, and were only placed in the ancient temple after the palace was destroyed. Don't look down on these inconspicuous flags. However, in reality, the refinement of each formation flag was extremely meticulous. The bones of fiend demons were used as the flagpoles and the skin of fiend demons were used as the flagpoles before being refined. The hair of fiend demons were used as threads to secure the flagpoles and flagpoles. The blood of fiend demons was used as ink and a brush of dermic power was condensed to carve out formation patterns on the flagpoles. With the 49 formation flags, Su Zimo only had to estimate the range of the ancient spirit lock formation and calculate the formation core before inserting the formation flags into it to activate the formation. Due to the fact that there were many restrictions on formations and that they took a long time to set up, it was rather passive. Coupled with the fact that many ancient formations were lost, the Tao of formations was on the decline. However, there was naturally a reason why the Tao of formations was able to remain as one of the four unorthodox groups to this day. In the ancient era, the Tao of formations was the most flourishing and was the foundation of the human race. The human race was weak, and they relied on many ancient formations to defend against the 10,000 races in the beginning. Because formations required a fixed location and had to be set up beforehand, the stronger the formation, the longer it would take to set it up. Therefore, it was difficult to unleash its full potential. When enemies meet on a narrow path, there was no way their opponents would wait for them to set up their formations before fighting to the death. That was the reason why an emperor created the formation flag technique to make up for the flaws of the Tao of formations. That emperor was known as the Formation Emperor, and was one of the ancient emperors who was on par with the Weapon Emperor, who created the demon revealing mirror. The saber momentum was heavy like a tsunami crashing against the shore. Clang! 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 Blood Quencher slashed down heavily on the weapons of the Jining Xinjuan, and released a tremendous force that was unstoppable like a tsunami. Exclamation point! Someone could not hold on any longer and spat out a mouthful of blood on the spot. His palm was torn and his weapon flew out as he fell. With his essence spirit and spirit energy sealed, the Jining Zhenjuan was only left with his body and blood qi. However, there was no way their bodies and blood qi could compare to Su Zimo. They were wielding dermic weapons to begin with. Because their essence spirits were sealed and they could not channel their dermic powers, the true might of their dermic weapons could not be released and they could not defend against the sharpness of Blood Quencher. Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Blood flashed repeatedly. Although the remaining Jining Zhenjuan gathered together, they could not defend against Su Zimo's massacre. After obtaining the legacy of the Saber Emperor and Shura's legacy in this life, Su Zimo's attainments in saber techniques had already reached a terrifying level. Countercurrent, raging tides, vortex and ripple of the sea calming manual. Ghost cry, blood flow, purgatory, white bones, fiend shadow and walking corpse of the surest saber. At times it was firm and unstoppable. At times it was continuous like water. At times it was majestic. At times it was sinister. Blood quencher drank all of the blood in Su Zimo's hands. The blood glow on the saber intensified, as though blood quencher was getting excited. In the town, some daring mortals could not hold it in any longer and secretly peeked through a crack in their doors, only to witness a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The immortals who were initially high and mighty, and declared that they were going to wipe out Pingyong Town were now fleeing wretchedly without any of the elegance of immortals. A green-robed man wielded a blood-colored saber and strolled leisurely on the long streets, leaving corpses behind him. Everywhere he passed, rivers of blood flowed. It was a complete massacre. Immortal slaying. Jining Zhenjuan, whose essence spirits and spirit energies were sealed, were like fish on the chopping block in front of Su Zimo. The skies gradually brightened. Perfected Lord Yundu was sweating profusely as he buried his head to break the formations at the edge of Pingyong Town. The ancient spirit lock and ancient god lock formations were extremely complicated, and even with his capabilities, it was difficult for him to dispel them within a short period of time. Fortunately, this trapping formation with surging fog was not too difficult to break through. Perfected Lord Yundu was even more flustered when he heard the tragic cries behind him. However, he did not turn back to look. He must not be distracted. Their only chance of survival was to dispel the trap formation as soon as possible. Time passed bit by bit. After an unknown period of time, the fog dissipated. Perfected Lord Yundu heaved a sigh of relief and slumped to the ground, already drenched in sweat. The morning sun had just risen and a ray of light tore through the fog, illuminating the small town. Everything looked peaceful and peaceful. Suddenly, Perfected Lord Yundu felt that something was amiss. It was too quiet. Unknowingly, the cries, pleas for mercy and cries for help behind him had already vanished. Thud, thud. Footsteps sounded. It was as though the person's feet were stained with some sort of sticky liquid as he walked on the stone path. The footsteps arrived behind him and disappeared suddenly. A chill ran down his spine. Perfected Lord Yundu did not dare to turn back. A blood-colored saber was slowly extended beneath his throat, emitting a thick stench of blood. The sharpness of the saber was bone-chilling. "You're the last." A voice sounded beside his ears. It was soft, indifferent and emotionless. Exclamation point. A flash of blood appeared. Perfected Lord Yundu's head fell and fresh blood splattered. His head rolled a few times on the ground before facing Pingyong Town. His eyes widened. Green robes and bloody path. The two different colors stimulated his final senses. His consciousness gradually blurred and eventually dissipated. Chapter 631. The doors on both sides of the street opened gradually, revealing a gap. Many mortals mustered their courage and looked outside. However, they were shocked. Corpses were strewn all over the limestone road. At the end of the road, a green-robed man stood in a pool of blood. Beside him was a long saber that was filled with blood chi, as though he was a fiend celestial from hell. The man's gaze was calm as he gazed at the rising sun in the east, slightly lost in thought. The morning glow shone on the man's face, shining brilliantly as though it was plated with a layer of gold, making him look sacred and peaceful. For some reason, everyone's initially fearful and restless hearts calmed down. Shrouded in a Buddhist light, the man resembled a bodhisattva from hell who had come to deliver the masses. Two completely different auras gathered on the man's body, but they did not seem out of place. Turning around, the man waved his sleeves and swept up the corpses on both sides of the street. He returned to his residence and vanished. Granny, who is second young Master Su? In the dilapidated house, a child who had yet to shed his innocence asked curiously. Second young Master Su. The old woman murmured softly with a lost expression, as though she was lost in her memories. When the others in Pingyong Town heard that name, they felt conflicted as well. The old woman said, "Do you remember someone that I mentioned to you just now? It's the person who was almost burned to death because he did not kneel to an immortal." "It's him?" The child was surprised. "Yes, it's him." The old woman nodded and sighed emotionally. "That should have happened 20 to 30 years ago." Second young Master Su was bullied by immortals and his scholarly achievements were stripped away, reducing him to a lowly commoner. To think that today, in the residence, Su Zimo took away the storage bags of the 100 Jining Xinjuan and piled their corpses in a corner casually. Su Zimo went to the backyard and chopped down a few trees to make a coffin before returning to the peach blossom tree. Looking at the old man who seemed to be in deep sleep under the tree, Su Zimo's eyes were filled with deep longing and reluctance. After a long time, Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and went forward to carry the old man gently. He placed him in the coffin and buried him under the tree, covering him with soil. Su Zimo stood silently as he looked at the brand new grave, feeling an unbearable stuffiness in his chest. All of a sudden, the peach blossom tree beside him swayed for a moment and tender sprouts appeared on the initially withered tree trunk. In the blink of an eye, buds bloomed one after another and bloomed silently. In this early winter, there was a hint of life and greenery in the residence. Flower petals gently drifted down, covering the entire tomb. The peach blossom tree swayed and emitted an emotion, as though it was consoling Su Zimo. Su Zimo caressed the tree trunk gently and smiled. "I'm fine." Upon hearing that, the peach blossom tree was delighted and its branches bent slightly, rubbing gently against Su Zimo's cheeks. It was not a... In this world, everything had spirituality. Even a lifeless rock could gain spirituality, let alone a peach blossom tree. Legend has it that a mighty figure with immense dermic powers cultivated on a rock all year round. Many years later, a life was born from the rock. Dai Yu had once imparted the Tao beneath the peach blossom tree. Apart from Su Zimo obtaining the Tao, the peach blossom tree gained some benefits and gained spirituality as well. Later on, Su Zimo formed his core under the peach blossom tree and comprehended two Jindan phenomenons. The peach blossom tree gained sentience and started cultivating as well. "It's good that it gained spirituality," Su Zimo said. "With you in this town from now on, you'll be able to protect the citizens." Su Zimo landed beside the grave and walked over. The sound of his footsteps seemed to have alarmed that person. That person stood up suddenly and bared his teeth at Su Zimo, hollering, "Get lost! Get lost! My sister doesn't want to cultivate." "No." The moment their gazes met, both of them were stunned. Shinan. Su Zimo could barely recognize him. He was already old. His face was filled with wrinkles, his hair was gray and most of his teeth were gone. It had been close to 30 years. Su Zimo often could not sense the passage of time when he cultivated. However, when he saw Shan Nan again, a complicated emotion surged into his heart. He still looked like he was 17 or 18 years old. As for Shan Nan, he was already an old man with one foot in the grave. "Get lost! Get lost!" The confusion in Shan Nan's eyes paused for a moment before he became delirious again. He pounced in front of the grave at the side and hollered in shock and fear, "We don't want the immortal opportunity. My sister and I don't want to become immortals." Shan Nan had already gone mad. Although the two of them had a grudge in the past, it was no longer important at this moment. Su Zimo felt a sense of sadness. After cultivating for dozens of years, his old friends had left one after another. Shan Nan could be considered as his last old friend in the mortal world. This old friend was about to die of old age as well. Su Zimo sighed and left with a flick of his sleeves. He no longer had any worries and severed his ties with the mortal world to pursue the Tao alone. Chapter 632. Songlang City. The cultivator army of the Great Zhou dynasty was gathered and numbered in the hundreds of thousands. For the past 2 years, the Empress of Great Zhou had led the army to guard the borders and had never retreated. However, a month ago, the Empress of Great Zhou was injured and fainted. The borders were routed. The eldest prince took control of the cultivator army and retreated all the way to the north of Songlang mountain range, stopping in Songlang City temporarily. City Lord's residence. The various generals, commanders and Jining Zhenjuan of the Great Zhou dynasty were gathered in the main hall of the residence. The Empress of Great Zhou sat high up with a frosty expression. Although she was a woman, she exuded an iron-blooded killing aura that was not inferior to men. Ji Yaoshua's face was a little pale, as though she had not recovered from her injuries. At the front of the many Jining Zhenjuan and generals, a purple-robed man stood with one hand behind his back. His black hair was like a waterfall. His eyes were deep and he had an extraordinary aura. Although the purple-robed man stood below, his aura was comparable to Ji Yaoshua's. The atmosphere in the main hall was extremely stifling. "We can't retreat." Ji Yaoshua had a resolute expression as she said word by word. "Once we retreat, it's a small matter of losing our territory. At that time, countless citizens of Great Zhou will be massacred by the three dynasties. As long as I, Ji Yaoshua, am in power, I will not allow that to happen." "Yaoshua, you're injured. Don't waste your energy on this. Leave everything to me." The purple-robed man below smiled faintly. Although he said those words of concern, there was no emotion in his eyes and he was unusually calm. The purple-robed man was the eldest prince who accompanied the army. Ji Yaoshua was unmoved and said in a deep voice, "I can leave it to you, but you have to promise me that you will guard Songlang City and not retreat." "Guard Songlang City?" The eldest prince smiled and asked instead. "The allied army of the three dynasties has millions of soldiers and is several times more than the Great Zhou dynasty. How should we guard it with a strong aura?" "Yaoshua, at times you're still too confident." The eldest prince and Ji Yaoshua were at each other's throats, and their words were not polite at all. Perfected Lord Mingzhe stood behind Ji Yaoshua and frowned at the many generals and cultivators in the hall. "The situation doesn't seem right. Emperor, be careful." Perfected Lord Mingzhe secretly sent a voice transmission. "Yeah, we won't be able to hold on. I heard that the secret agent reported that the allied forces of the three dynasties have already arrived at Songlang mountain range. After tonight, they will definitely cross the mountain range and advance towards Songlang City. If we don't retreat now, we won't have another chance." The generals under the first prince's command whispered amongst themselves. Ji Yaoshua's expression was ice-cold as she listened to the discussions in the grand hall. She stared at the first prince and said slowly, "Since eldest brother is unable to guard Songlang City, you should retreat. I will guard it personally." The eldest prince smiled leisurely and asked, "Yaoshua, do you really insist on doing this?" "Not bad." Ji Yaoshua's tone was firm and unshakable. The first prince put away his smile and said coldly, "Then don't blame me for being rude." Ji Yaoshua narrowed her eyes and asked, "What do you want?" "Nothing." The first prince sneered and killing intent flashed through his eyes. "Since you insist on doing things your own way, I'll replace you." The moment he said that, the entire grand hall went silent. Ji Yaoshua's expression changed and she bolted upright. However, her body swayed and she nearly fell. Perfected Lord Mingzhe supported her hurriedly and turned to look at the first prince with a sharp gaze, questioning, "First prince, are you trying to force the first prince to abdicate?" "Force the first prince to abdicate?" The first prince reared his head in laughter with a menacing gaze and shouted, "That position did not belong to her to begin with. I'm the eldest son of my father's first wife. The position of the empress belongs to me to begin with." Ji Yaoshua was flustered and her old injuries acted up. She spat out a mouthful of blood and her face turned even paler. Ji Yaoshua clutched her chest and smiled bitterly. "You finally said those words. Humph, how can a woman be fit to be the empress? There's no such logic in this world since the ancient times." The first prince sneered once more. A look of arrogance flashed through Ji Yaoshua's eyes as she pushed Perfected Lord Mingzhe away and stood upright. "First, I had no intention of fighting with you. However, since you look down on women, I'll have to fight for it. How many people will follow you if you want to force the first prince to abdicate?" Ji Yaoshua hollered and exuded the authority of the empress. She surveyed her surroundings with a burning gaze and many generals and commanders lowered their heads, not daring to meet her gaze. Naturally, the many Jining Zhenjuan in the grand hall were unafraid of the authority of the empress as they lowered their heads with calm expressions. Ji Yaoshua's heart skipped a beat when she saw the reactions of everyone in the grand hall. The military must have changed during the month that she was unconscious. Fufufu. The first prince laughed with a mocking look in his eyes. "Ji Yaoshua, for the past 20 years, Great Zhou has been in turmoil ever since you ascended to the position of the empress. How many people do you think will follow you? Oh right. I've got to remind you that if nothing goes wrong, Second and fourth should have already spoken to father to have you crippled. A commotion broke out in the grand hall. What do you want? Ji Yaoshua asked coldly. It's not appropriate for Great Zhou to go head-on against the alliance of the three dynasties, and we should prioritize peace. As for the conditions, the first prince paused for a moment and looked at Ji Yaoshua with a fake smile. I'll have to trouble you to visit the three dynasties as a guest, sister. How dare you? Perfected Lord Mingzhe was enraged and hollered. You're thinking of offering up the current empress? Furthermore, she's your sister. Do you have any kinship in your heart? There's no such thing as kinship in the royal family, the first prince said coldly with a cold expression. I believe that as long as the three dynasties retreat, father won't blame me even if I have to hand you over. Ji Yaoshua did not say anything. Instead of anger, her heart was filled with sorrow. She had not expected those words to come from her closest kin. Traitor, you deserve death. Perfected Lord Mingzhe waved his sleeves and a flying sword shot out towards the first prince's glabella. However, the first prince did not move and his expression was unchanged. Clang! Another flying sword pierced through the air and repelled Perfected Lord Mingzhe's flying sword. Two Jining Jinjuan stood out and shielded the first prince behind them, glaring at Perfected Lord Mingzhe coldly. Yongyan Jingshan, the two of you. Perfected Lord Mingzhe looked at the two of them in disbelief. Mingzhe, a fine bird chooses a fine tree to nest in. Handing over Ji Yaoshua might be the only way for the alliance army to retreat, Perfected Lord Yongyan said. That's preposterous. Perfected Lord Mingzhe grit his teeth. A method like that will only embarrass the Great Zhou dynasty. The alliance army is attacking with a ferocious aura. How can they retreat so easily? You guys. Perfected Lord Jingshan interrupted. A wise man submits to circumstances. Mingzhe, we don't want to be enemies with you. You don't have a chance. Back down. You guys are turning a blind eye to the emperor's predicament? Perfected Lord Mingzhe turned around and looked at the other Jining Jinjuan in the hall. Most of them avoided him and a small number of them chose to stand behind the first prince directly. Senior Mingzhe, now that things have come to this, you don't have to bother about me. Ji Yaoshua was completely disheartened and said softly, you just have to return and report to father that even if I die, I won't fall into the hands of the three dynasties and be humiliated. Ha 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 ha. When the first prince saw that the outcome was set, he could not help but burst into laughter. Sister, don't blame me for being ruthless. Blame yourself for being born in the royal family of the Great Zhou dynasty, and for fighting with me for the position of the emperor. Before his laughter ended, a change happened. Even if a beast tide had erupted, it shouldn't have been able to shake the allied forces of the three dynasties. The strong renovator gulped and continued. The allied forces of the three dynasties are almost completely wiped out. Out of the millions of troops, only a few 100,000 managed to escape. They were utterly defeated. The three princes are dead and the allied forces of the three dynasties have been defeated. They have already retreated. There was complete silence in the hall. Not a single sound could be heard. Completely wiped out. The three princes were dead. The news was so shocking that everyone had forgotten that just now. A prince of Great Zhou was shot to death by an arrow. The heavens have blessed Great Zhou. Many generals and commanders knelt on the ground and shouted emotionally. Ji Yaoshua frowned slightly in deep thought. The lips of the cultivator quivered, as though he wanted to say something but hesitated. Perfected Lord Mingzhe frowned. Although this was a joyous occasion, there were still many doubts. There were more than 100 Jining Jinjuan in the allied forces of the three dynasties. Where are they? Perfected Lord Mingzhe asked once more. A look of fear flashed through the eyes of the burly man as he replied with a quivering voice, all of them are dead. All of them are dead? Perfected Lord Mingzhe shuddered and asked, are the fiend demons born in Songlang Mountain range that powerful? There are no fiend demons. The burly man shook his head. The beast tide in Songlang Mountain range was triggered by a single person. Later on, more than 100 Jining Jinjuan chased after that person and arrived at a small town. Suddenly a thick fog rose from the small town. By the time the fog dissipated, All of the Jining Zhenjuan were dead without a single survivor. The hall went silent once more. Everyone was shocked and confused. A single person could command thousands of demons and trigger such a terrifying beast tide to engulf the allied forces of the three dynasties? Or was that a ferocious beast in human form? Why did that ferocious beast in human form end up in a town? There was even a fog in the town? Later on, more than 100 Jining Zhenjuan were dead? All of these things sounded very strange. Perfected Lord Mingzhe pondered for a moment and asked, why did that person stop the allied forces of the three dynasties? The burly man replied, his kin passed away and coincidentally, the allied forces of the three dynasties invaded. In his rage, he went on a killing spree and triggered a beast tide, declaring that he wanted everyone to die with him. When she heard that, Ji Yaoshua seemed to have thought of something and shuddered. Ignoring her injuries, she ran out of the hall and looked into the distance. Perfected Lord Mingzhe's gaze was sharp as he asked again, what's that person's name? Think it's Su Zimo. Pust. Everyone in the hall gasped and their expressions changed when they heard that name. Su Zimo, the strongest monster incarnate in history 20 years ago. Back in the Great Qian ruins, he defeated all the paragons of the North region and incinerated their nascent souls, dyeing half the skies red. 20 years had passed, and this name had almost been forgotten by people. To think that it would be mentioned once more today. Impossible. Perfected Lord Jingshan said resolutely. Everyone knows that Su Zimo leaped into the Dragon Burial Valley. How can he still be alive? Perfected Lord Mingzhe was in disbelief as well. However, he knew that if there was anyone in this world who could do something as such, it would most likely be Su Zimo. I heard that Su Zimo used a connate spirit weapon, the black gold arrow, in the battle between the paragons of the North region 20 years ago. A cultivator in the crowd whispered. There were rumors about the relationship between Ji Yaoshua and Su Zimo in the Great Zhou dynasty. Everyone was enlightened. If those rumors were true, that arrow that killed the eldest prince was a show of might. There was no chance for excuses. He was killed straight away. With the defeat of the alliance army of the three dynasties and the death of the eldest prince, who would dare to target Ji Yaoshua again? None of the Jining Zhenjuan in the hall, including the Jining Zhenjuan of the two princes, Jing Shan and Yong Yan, dared to cause trouble for Su Zimo. Now that more than 100 Jining Zhenjuan of the three dynasties were dead, who would dare to provoke him? There were only 5 words left in Perfected Lord Mingzhe's mind. A single arrow determined the fate of the universe. To think that the methods of that young man would be even more frightening after 20 years. Chapter 634. Outside the main hall, Ji Yaoshua gazed into the distance with a forlorn expression, and a hint of disappointment in her eyes. There was nothing there. Just now, that person had already left. Perfected Lord Mingzhe arrived beside Ji Yaoshua and asked curiously, you knew that he wasn't dead, Empress? That's right. I knew 15 years ago. 15 years ago? Perfected Lord Mingzhe froze for a moment and frowned in deep thought. A moment later, he shuddered and blurted out, Dragon Burial Valley, that middle-aged monk. Ji Yaoshua nodded. It's no wonder why that monk risked his life to save you back then and even escorted you all the way. Perfected Lord Mingzhe lamented internally. That monk was decisive in killing and his attacks were swift. His thought process was chilling and didn't seem like someone from the Buddhist monasteries. Back then, I had a feeling that the monk's methods were similar to someone else's. To think that it was truly him. When Perfected Lord Mingzhe saw that Ji Yaoshua was silent, he knew that what happened today was a huge blow to this child. The betrayal of a loved one wasn't something that everyone could accept. The sudden departure of that person must have affected her greatly as well. Not knowing how to console her, Perfected Lord Mingzhe asked, why did he choose to avoid meeting you? He was afraid of implicating me in Great Zhou. Ji Yaoshua asked softly, Senior Mingzhe, do you really think that the reason why he started the beast stampede and went on a killing spree was because of the death of his loved one? Isn't that the case? Perfected Lord Mingzhe froze for a moment. Of course not. Ji Yaoshua shook her head. Perfected Lord Mingzhe frowned and asked, then why would he say that? Ji Yaoshua replied, That's the only way he can have nothing to do with me or Great Zhou. That's the only way the major sects and factions won't vent their anger on Great Zhou. Perfected Lord Mingzhe was enlightened. Su Zimo's identity was way too sensitive. He had offended way too many factions 20 years ago. There was utterly no place for him in the northern region. Given the situation back then, not to mention Su Zimo himself, whoever dared to take in Su Zimo's brother would face imminent disaster. It was one thing for Su Zimo to die at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. Now that he had returned alive, he would definitely have to face the pursuit of the 10 upper sects, for gentry clans, Glass Palace and other major factions. Only by severing all ties with the Great Zhou dynasty would he not implicate the Great Zhou dynasty. It would not be long before news of this battle in Songlang mountain range spread throughout the entire northern region. At that time, regardless of whether they had any grudges with Su Zimo, countless sects, forces and cultivators would join in the pursuit. That was because Su Zimo had the divine phoenix bone and many secret techniques. Whoever obtained Su Zimo's items would replace him and become the new eternal monster. Heroes vying for supremacy. Su Zimo was that dear. Perfected Lord Mingzhe sighed gently. It's been hard on him. Perfected Lord Mingzhe knew that from this day forth, Su Zimo would bear the infamy of killing indiscriminately, being cruel and a fiend. Nobody would be grateful to him. That was because everyone would only think that Su Zimo was a cruel and violent demon, whose hands were stained with the blood of countless humans for the sake of venting his personal grievances. Those who were not of the same race would be punished by the world. Ji Yaoshua could vaguely sense that the two of them would probably never meet again after this parting. Empress, let's return, Perfected Lord Mingzhe said softly. The Great Zhou dynasty has no more worries now that the 3 dynasties have retreated. I believe that no one in the Great Zhou dynasty will doubt you from today onwards. Ji Yaoshua sighed and turned to leave. Due to the passing of his kin, Su Zimo appeared and launched a beast stampede, killing millions of cultivators and hundreds of Jining Zhenjuan. That news swept through the entire north region like a storm. It caused a huge uproar in the cultivation world of the north region. How is that possible? Everyone witnessed him jumping into the Dragon Burial Valley 20 years ago. To think that he's still alive? Millions of cultivators. What a ruthless method. I heard that he hasn't cultivated to the level of a fiend demon yet. How did Jining Zhenjuan kill hundreds of them? Could his strength have already reached such a terrifying level? It seems like Jining Zhenjuan was ambushed and his spirit energy and essence spirit were sealed. Is this a declaration of war against the human race? Every cultivator in the north region was discussing this matter. Initially, the cultivation world had calmed down with the impending opening of the intermediate ancient battlefield. All the major sects and factions were preparing to send their disciples into the ancient battlefield. To think that the north region would be shaken by the news. There was an obvious increase in cultivators in the Great Zhou dynasty. All the major sects and factions took action, wanting to locate Su Zimo as soon as possible. Cultivators from the 10 upper sects, for gentry clans, 2 ancient aristocratic families and even super sects of Tianhuang mainland such as Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth sect appeared to search for Su Zimo. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible for Su Zimo to hide. However, no one discovered Su Zimo for 10 consecutive days. In fact, the Dharma Daojun was even alarmed during this period of time. It was said that a Dao Lord of Glass Palace had ascended Misty Peak personally to capture Su Zimo, but to no avail. Powerful spirit consciousnesses would sweep through the capital of Great Zhou daily, scanning every single corner of the capital. It was as though Su Zimo had vanished from the face of the earth. Nobody knew of his whereabouts. Right then, a spirit crane that flew over from the vicinity of Glass Palace caused a huge uproar once more. There was a message written on it. You guys had better not send any cultivators into the ancient battlefield. Otherwise, I'll kill every single one I see. 13 cities of Yen country, an eye for an eye. There were 3 words written on it: Su Zimo. The fact that no cultivators of Glass Palace stood out to deny it meant that it was most likely true. The news spread rapidly and caused an uproar. To think that someone would dare to threaten Glass Palace in this world. This was a declaration of war. A perfected being of Jin Dan was declaring war against this behemoth of Tianhuang mainland that had a legacy of time. No one could match that sharpness. There were no schemes or schemes. There was only an open declaration of war. He was threatening Glass Palace in front of the entire cultivation world. If you dare to send anyone into the ancient battlefield, I, Su Zimo, will kill all of you. 13 cities of Yen country, an eye for an eye. A full 20 years had passed. Nobody expected Su Zimo to still be alive. Less than that, nobody expected this monster incarnate to declare war against Glass Palace in such a domineering manner the moment he reappeared. It was as though he was trampling on Glass Palace's face. The entire cultivation world was in an uproar as discussions broke out. Overly rigid means easy to break. This lad's sharpness is exposed. How dare a spirit demon of the Jindan realm challenge Glass Palace? He must have a death wish. You're wrong. In my opinion, he's very smart. Oh? What do you mean? If that lad were to charge into Glass Palace directly, he would be courting death. However, he's very smart and chose to fight in the ancient battlefield. So what? 20 years ago, this lad killed Wuxia and was the true number one of the North region. There's a suppression of cultivation in the ancient battlefield. In the Jindan realm, he's the heavens. Who in Glass Palace is a match for him? That might not be the case. Don't forget that this lad's Jindan was crippled completely by a void reversion. There's no doubt about that. During the battle in Songlang Mountain Range, this lad did not have any spirit energy either. In my opinion, his strength has decreased instead. Chapter 635. Su Zimo declared war on Glass Palace. The various major sects, factions and cultivators all had different opinions regarding this matter. Some people felt that Su Zimo was at his peak after surviving a calamity and returning to kill millions of cultivators. There were also people who felt that Su Zimo was reckless and arrogant. His actions were no different from an ant trying to shake a tree. Even if his physique was strong, his bloodline was shocking and his melee combat strength was terrifying. However, it was undeniable that his Jindan was crippled. That was the truth. There was no way a void reversion would fail if he took action personally 20 years ago. There was no way he could repair the destroyed Jindan as well. Furthermore, none of the cultivators who survived the battle at Songlang Mountain Range sensed any spirit energy fluctuation from Su Zimo's body. The destruction of Jindan meant that there was no more Jindan phenomenon. In the opinion of some people, Su Zimo, who had lost his Jindan, might not be able to win against the peerless paragons of Glass Palace who were at the Jindan realm. Furthermore, there were sealers in the intermediate ancient battlefield as well. Glass Palace had a long history and a strong foundation as an immortal sect. How could they be frightened by a single spirit crane from Su Zimo? There was bound to be a fierce battle in the ancient battlefield. Glass Palace prepared for the battle while searching for Su Zimo's whereabouts. They even offered a high bounty. Unfortunately, there was still no news of Su Zimo after another 20 days. The day of the ancient battlefield's opening approached gradually. Bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, a quiet old temple. In the courtyard there were two people and a fox. A young monk assumed a lotus position and faced the morning sun with a lowered gaze, chanting sutras and paying respects to Buddha. Bathed in the sunlight, he seemed to be shrouded in a layer of Buddhist light. On the other side, a green-robed scholar laid casually on a stone bench with his hands behind his head. He seemed to be resting with his eyes closed in an indescribably leisurely manner. On the green-robed scholar's body, there was a little fiery red fox that was jumping around and having fun. Old temple, monk, scholar, fox, Sanskrit chants. Everything seemed like a scene from a painting. The monk was Mingzhen. The scholar was naturally Su Zimo, who had stirred up a storm in the northern region. An old monk walked out of the grand hall. Mingzhen, Ming-Xian, get ready. The primordial battlefield is about to open. Let me tell you about the origins of this Jindan phenomenon ranking. Su Zimo and Li Wuyo hurriedly got up and sat upright. In ancient times, the human race rose to power and fought against the ancient 9 races. In order to select the most promising members of the younger generation and nurture them to ensure the continuity of the human race, the ancient expert fairy Linglong established this ranking, and it has been passed down ever since. Therefore, this list has a strict age requirement. Those who are over 200 years old will not be able to enter this list. Hearing this, Su Zimo nodded. Back then, this list was created to gather the geniuses of the human race. Naturally, there was a strict age limit. To Taoist Master Jin Dan, who had a lifespan of 500 years, 200 years was definitely considered young. Su Zimo couldn't help but think of a person. The number one of the previous phenomenon ranking Dean. 100 years ago, that person had already obtained the number one of the phenomenon ranking in his 30s. The reason why he entered the primordial battlefield this time round was because he wanted to take the number one spot twice in a row. Fairy Linglong has already transcended the tribulations and ascended. After combining with the Daming mantra to form the Daming True Scripture, it would actually become a heaven-level spell? That was something that Su Zimo could not figure out no matter how he thought about it. Of course, for Jining Zhenjuan, even if he obtained the heaven-level Dharma spell, he would not be able to release it. Heaven-level Dharma spells had way too high a requirement for one's essence spirit. Even if Jining Zhenjuan burned his essence spirit, he would not be able to release heaven-level Dharma spells. In theory, anyone could cultivate heaven-level Dharma spells as long as they were at nascent soul realm. However, heaven-level Dharma spells were difficult to understand. Jining Zhenjuan had just cultivated his essence spirit and knew nothing about this level. It was extremely difficult to cultivate them. Of course, the benefits of cultivating heaven-level Dharma spells were obvious as well. At the same cultivation realm, an essence spirit that cultivated a heaven-level Dharma spell would be much stronger than the essence spirits of other perfected lords. The old monk continued, after entering nascent soul realm, you'll have to change your weapons. Even if you're wielding connate spirit weapons, you won't be able to release the power of Dharma spells. In terms of the toughness of connate spirit weapons, even ordinary dharmic weapons would find it difficult to shatter them. However, connate spirit weapons were only at the level of spirit energy. There are 4 types of dharmic weapons that correspond to different realms. It's extremely simple. The weapons used by Jining Zhenjuan are perfected Lord dharmic weapons. The weapons used by void reversions are Dao being dharmic weapons. And so on. The Dharma Dao Jun wields Dao Lord dharmic weapons and conjoint body mighty figures wields mighty figure dharmic weapons. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and he asked instinctively, above the conjoint body realm is the Mahayana realm where they're addressed as patriarchs. Are Mahayana patriarchs using patriarch dharmic weapons? Wrong, the old monk smiled. The weapons used by Mahayana patriarchs are dharmic treasures. Dharmic treasures? Both Su Zimo and Su Zimo were stunned. That was an unfamiliar term for them. The old monk said, the logic behind it is simple. Above spirit energy is dharmic power and above dharmic power is the power of divine powers. Above spirit arts are dharmic arts and above dharmic arts are divine powers. Correspondingly, above spirit weapons are dharmic weapons and above dharmic weapons are dharmic treasures. The reason why one has to change weapons after reaching a certain realm is because one's strength will undergo a qualitative change as their cultivation increases. If dharmic power is injected into a spirit weapon, it will explode. Similarly, dharmic weapons can't withstand the power of divine powers. Dharmic weapons that have been baptized by the power of divine powers are dharmic treasures. When he heard that, Su Zimo was enlightened. Be it perfected Lord dharmic weapons or Dao being dharmic weapons, their grades are the same as spirit weapons. The old monk continued, an inferior grade perfected Lord dharmic weapon with a single dharmic pattern, a middle grade perfected Lord dharmic weapon with 2 dharmic patterns, superior grade with 3 dharmic patterns, supreme grade with 4 dharmic patterns, perfect with 5 dharmic patterns and connate with 6 dharmic patterns. You guys know all of that? Su Zimo nodded. He was a weapon refinement master to begin with and naturally knew about that. Pausing for a moment, the old monk took a deep breath of air and said, what I want to talk about is something else. If you guys can successfully advance to nascent soul realm, you'll be able to cultivate an essence spirit and every Jining Zhenjuan will have a chance to refine a destiny dharmic weapon of their own. Destiny dharmic weapon. Both of them were invigorated. Su Zimo asked, what's a destiny dharmic weapon? A destiny dermic weapon is a dermic weapon that is closely connected to your essence spirit. You have to use your essence spirit to refine it day and night. Over time, an extremely close connection will be established between you and the dermic weapon, and it will be like a part of your body. The old monk explained, a destiny dermic weapon can unleash your greatest strength. When he heard that, Su Zimo frowned. If that was the case, there was nothing special about a destiny dermic weapon. The old monk continued, the true strength of a destiny dermic artifact lies in the fact that it will become stronger as your cultivation increases. Su Zimo's eyes shone brightly as he vaguely realized something. A look of admiration appeared in the old monk's eyes as he nodded. If you choose a superior grade perfected Lord dermic weapon at the beginning, your destiny dermic weapon will be upgraded to the level of a Dao being dermic weapon, after the refinement of your essence spirit, when you cultivate to the void reversion realm. Furthermore, it will be a superior grade 3 patterned one. Indeed. Su Zimo nodded and thought to himself, that's impressive. This meant that the grade of a destiny dermic weapon would not change even if it was upgraded. In other words, if Su Zimo chose a Khanate perfected Lord dermic weapon as his destiny dermic weapon, it would transform into a Dao being dermic weapon when he cultivated to the void reversion realm. Its grade would still be Khanate. Chapter 637. The old monk said, it's naturally best if you can obtain a Khanate dermic weapon for a destiny dermic weapon. Apart from that, perfect and supreme grade dermic weapons are acceptable as well. Su Zimo nodded. After all, Khanate dermic weapons were way too rare, and could only be chanced upon by luck. The old monk continued, apart from the rich spirit chi in the intermediate ancient battlefield, there are also two types of spirit herbs that are extinct in Tianhuang mainland, the spirit-gathering fruit and soul-nourishing blood ginseng. It's extremely dangerous for perfected Jin Dan to break through to the nascent soul realm. In the best-case scenario, his cultivation would be crippled, and in the worst-case scenario, he would die on the spot without a corpse. The spirit-gathering fruit is used to help perfected Jin Dan condense his essence spirit during his breakthrough. You only have to consume a single spirit-gathering fruit. Consuming more than that is useless. After cultivators become Jining Jinjuan, they can consume the soul-nourishing blood ginseng to increase their cultivation speed and nourish and strengthen their essence spirits. It's a rare spirit material. Naturally, the more soul-nourishing blood ginseng, the better. Su Zimo roughly understood. Apart from the numerous opportunities, the intermediate ancient battlefield also contained unimaginable cultivation resources. If he could obtain sufficient benefits from it, his future cultivation path would be much smoother. Of course, the intermediate ancient battlefield is filled with danger as well. In fact, it's 10 times more dangerous than the elementary battlefield that you've experienced. The old monk said sternly, you've made too many enemies and have to be careful. In addition, there will be demons from Tianhuang mainland who will enter the intermediate ancient battlefield. Demons? Su Zimo froze for a moment. The old monk nodded. After forming a core, demons will also condense their essence spirits. Therefore, when demons enter, they will fight for the spirit-gathering fruit and soul-nourishing blood ginseng as well. When he heard that, Su Zimo came to a realization. In the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness, the Yin spirit section came after the core formation section. In reality, the Yin spirit was similar to Jining Jinjuan's essence spirit. After demons cultivate their Yin spirits, they would become fiend demons that could take on human form and speak in human tongue. Even their demonic chi would be concealed such that even cultivators would find it difficult to distinguish them. After cultivating their Yin spirits, demons could control dermic powers as well. Once it was released, it would be a legendary demonic technique. The old monk said, ordinary demons can't threaten you. However, in Tianhuang mainland, there are 8 regions where the 8 major demon races reside, and they occupy a large area. Those are the 8 demon regions. There are many terrifying birds and beasts in the 8 regions. Only those who have experienced countless bloody battles and an extraordinary bloodline can stand out. You have to be careful. Disciple will bear that in mind. Su Zimo nodded. There's nothing else. The old monk walked down the stone steps and stared at a spot in the void. His eyes lit up and he suddenly reached out with his withered hand and gently patted the void. Boom! A loud explosion resounded in the void. Under the gazes of Su Zimo and Li Wuyo, this area of the void actually shattered and collapsed deeply, slowly forming a pitch-black vortex. It was unknown where this vortex led to. At the other end, an ancient and desolate aura was faintly emitted. The old monk turned to Su Zimo and asked, "Are you planning to leave the North region this time round?" Yes. Su Zimo did not hide anything. His brother was already dead, and he no longer had any attachments in the mortal world. Most of his concerns were with Xiaoning. Furthermore, the North region could no longer accommodate him. If he continued staying in the North region, he might implicate even more people. The reason why Su Zimo did not even return to Misty Peak this time round was because he was worried that Misty Peak would be burdened by him. The old monk had a benevolent gaze and said in a gentle tone, "After leaving the North region, you only have to remember one thing. If you encounter any danger and have no way out, tear that major transference talisman and return here. As long as I'm alive, I'll definitely be able to protect you." Su Zimo pursed his lips in silence and bowed deeply to the old monk. "You guys can leave." The old monk waved his hand. Su Zimo and Ming Zhan exchanged glances and leaped into the vortex in the void without hesitation. The little fox followed suit. Su Zimo felt the world spin. In his daze, his body and soul seemed to have separated and were no longer under his control. His surroundings were pitch black and he could not see anything. All of his senses were gone. Even his spirit perception was extremely blurry. The two of them seemed to be traversing through a dark tunnel. Initially, Su Zimo could still sense Ming Zhan and the little fox's auras with his spirit perception. However, before long, Su Zimo suddenly realized that Ming Zhan and the little fox had already vanished from his spirit perception. Gradually, a speck of light appeared right in front of him, growing larger and clearer. He regained his consciousness. His soul and body seemed to have fused together once more. Swoosh! Su Zimo charged towards the speck of light and barged out, descending rapidly. This was a brand new world. The spirit chi was extremely rich and was many times richer than the outside world. Su Zimo knew that he had already entered the intermediate ancient battlefield. Su Zimo released his spirit perception and scanned his surroundings warily. There was no one around. Ming Zhan and the little fox had already vanished. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. He realized that an accident occurred during the teleportation process and they were separated. A slight deviation in the teleportation process could result in a distance of 500 kilometers. However, Su Zimo was not worried about Ming Zhan. Ever since Diyin left the old temple, Ming Zhan had been fighting against otherworldly soldiers in the Great Qian ruins for the past 10 years, and had experienced several life and death situations as well. Ming Zhan's combat experience was much richer now. Furthermore, Ming Zhan was not weak to begin with and had even cultivated the world-cleansing Qinglian that was once ranked in the top 10 of the phenomenon ranking. The one that Su Zimo was truly worried about was the little fox. However, it was akin to searching for a needle in a haystack if he wanted to find a fox in this massive world. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo roughly determined his direction and headed towards the center of the ancient battlefield. The spirit chi here was way too rich and spirit materials and herbs could be seen everywhere. In some places the spirit chi even formed lakes. If nothing went wrong, Su Zimo would definitely be able to break through to the perfected Jindan realm a year later. Along the way, although the surroundings were lush, he did not see a single cultivator. Before long, Su Zimo felt something. Not far away, a demon beast was sprawled in a patch of grass that was taller than a person. Its eyes were green and extremely terrifying as it glared at Su Zimo. Su Zimo was not bothered and continued forward. When he passed by the demon beast, the grass moved and the demon beast leaped up with a berserk killing intent, lunging towards Su Zimo fiercely. Roar! A deafening roar burst forth from the depths of the demon beast's throat. If it was any other ordinary cultivator, they would definitely be stunned by the sudden attack of the demon beast and die under the claws of the demon beast with a single roar. However, Su Zimo cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, and was the strongest demon. That roar had no effect on him at all. Su Zimo turned his head slightly and looked at the demon beast that was lunging over with a fake smile. Suddenly he opened his mouth. OM! The demon beast that was lunging over froze in midair with a dazed gaze. It was stunned. Chapter 638. This was a heavenbane wolf, an ancient remnant beast. It was dozens of feet long and was covered in blood-red fur. Bloodthirsty, it traveled alone most of the time and was extremely strong and ferocious. But right now, the ancient remnant beast's gaze was unfocused, and it had already lost consciousness from the shock. In reality, the damning mantra alone would not have been able to achieve such a terrifying effect. More than that, Su Zimo cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. His lungs were strong. His breathing was long and his mouth and tongue were connected. His explosive power was shocking. Ordinary demon beasts would not be able to withstand a single roar, let alone the release of the damning mantra. Cultivators who were not strong enough would be killed on the spot. Su Zimo extended his arm and spread his fingers, pressing down on the heavenbane wolf's forehead. A man and a wolf fell rapidly. Boom! The heavenbane wolf's head was pressed into the mud by Su Zimo, creating a huge pit and almost suffocating. Rawr! The heavenbane wolf woke up and struggled continuously. Its sharp claws were like daggers as it dug furiously into the ground, causing mud to fly everywhere. It let out a series of threatening roars and its fur stood on end. However, no matter how it struggled, it could not break free from Su Zimo's grip. That palm was fair, tender and sparkling like jade. It did not look like it had wielded a weapon before. However, when the palm spread open, it seemed to have turned into a mountain that pinned the heavenbane wolf's head to the ground. Su Zimo's gaze turned cold and killing intent appeared on his face. As though it sensed something, the heavenbane wolf shuddered and stopped struggling. Demon beasts were extremely sensitive towards danger. Furthermore, for it to be able to cultivate to this point, it had already gained sentience and could naturally tell that Su Zimo had already held back. When he saw that the heavenbane wolf was motionless, Su Zimo released his grip. Panting heavily, the heavenbane wolf raised its head slightly and looked at the human that was inches away. Killing intent surged in its heart once more. Under normal circumstances, cultivators had weak physiques. At this distance there was a high chance that it would succeed. But in the blink of an eye it gave up. Su Zimo was expressionless and his gaze was calm. The heavenbane wolf had a premonition that if it were to make a single move, it would be killed by this human. Su Zimo flipped himself onto the back of the heavenbane wolf. He patted the wolf's head and pointed towards the depths of the battlefield, saying, "Over there." The heavenbane wolf stood up unwillingly and shook off the dust on its head. With a low growl, it dashed towards the depths of the battlefield. In its heart, as long as Su Zimo did not sign a blood oath with it, it would listen to the arrangements of this human. Sitting on the back of the heavenbane wolf, Su Zimo could calm down and cultivate. He was now at the peak of the late Jin Dan stage. In an environment with such dense spiritual energy, as long as he cultivated for a period of time, he would definitely be able to sense the opportunity to break through. 10 days later, Su Zimo, who was sitting on the heavenbane wolf, suddenly woke up from his cultivation. His ears twitched and he could vaguely hear the sounds of fighting from afar, mixed with the roars of demon beasts. "Let's go over there and take a look." Su Zimo patted the heavenbane wolf and pointed in another direction. The heavenbane wolf sprinted and arrived at the entrance of a valley before long. There were at least 1,000 demon beasts attacking a group of cultivators in the valley. The scary thing was that almost all of the demon beasts were ancient remnant beasts. On a mountain peak at the edge of the valley stood a gigantic lion. Its fur was golden and it was majestic. Su Zimo had not expected that demons would have a similar blood oath as well. Instead, demons wanted to take in humans as their slaves. The golden lion declared loudly, "It's your honor to be my slaves." In the primordial era, humans were enslaved by the 10,000 races. Your bloodline is weak and you're lowly to the core with lives as worthless as grass. You guys were born as slaves. Born as slaves. Those words were extremely piercing to Su Zimo. Although he was a demonic cultivator, he was a human. The contempt in the golden lion's tone was something that Su Zimo could empathize with. It was as though he had returned to the primordial era where humans were humiliated. The remaining cultivators had terrible expressions. This was the Golden Lion's final warning to them. If they refused, they would be torn to shreds by the 1,000 ancient remnant beasts around them. The leader looked indignant but could only sigh gently. How arrogant. Before that person could finish, a mocking voice sounded from outside the valley, interrupting him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless gazes were focused on the entrance of the valley. A green-robed cultivator riding on a heaven-bane wolf walked in slowly with a calm expression and a calm gaze. Unless it was a cultivator with extremely strong senses, it was difficult to defend against level 3 ethereal sword. There were way too many ways Suzimo could deal with these ancient remnant beasts. The simplest and most brutal way was to rely on his terrifying bloodline and physique to barge in recklessly. There was no way the ancient remnant beasts could stop him. However, Suzimo did not do that at that moment. Sensing the contempt and mockery of the Golden Lion, he was going to use the methods of a cultivator to kill these ancient remnant beasts and suppress the Golden Lion. After the 2 ancient remnant beasts died, more than 10 ancient remnant beasts charged forward without waiting for the Golden Lion's orders. This is bad. The blue-robed man shook his head. Although this person's sword controlling technique is brilliant, he can't fight with his fists. Before he could finish his sentence, he choked back his words. Suzimo slapped his storage bag and a total of 25 flying swords appeared in the void. Including the 2 flying swords from before, there were a total of 27 flying swords. What was even more frightening was that all 27 flying swords were supreme-grade spirit weapons. If it was said that it was nothing for a perfected Jin Dan to have 2 supreme-grade spirit weapons in the ancient battlefield, it was frightening for him to have more than 20 supreme-grade spirit weapons. So many flying swords? The cultivators were dumbfounded. They had never seen someone take out so many flying swords at once. The 27 flying swords hovered in front of Suzimo in an orderly manner. Shining with a blinding light, they sped towards the incoming ancient remnant beasts. Shoo! The 27 flying swords vanished once more. In the blink of an eye, the 27 flying swords reappeared. At the same time, the ancient remnant beasts that pounced over fell one after another with bloody holes in their heads. They were dead. The blue-robed man and the others were shocked. To be able to control 27 flying swords to such a fine degree was a very difficult thing to do. The scariest thing was that the green-robed cultivator did not have any emotions in his eyes the entire time. It was as though everything before him was within his expectations. Roar! Roar! A commotion broke out among the demon beasts. The death of more than 10 ancient remnant beasts was nothing much for the massive demon beast horde. However, they could sense a dangerous aura coming from the green-robed cultivator. You're an interesting human. You're qualified to be my mount. The Golden Lion spoke in human language and nodded confidently. Ha 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 ha. Suzimo reared his head in laughter as the 27 flying swords circled around him. He shouted, Yellow Lion, let's see who's going to be subdued today. Senior Brother Zhu, this person is not weak. There seems to be a chance for us to be saved. The beautiful female cultivator at the side whispered with sparkling eyes. That's hard to say. The blue-robed man shook his head. From the looks of it, this person's limit is to control 27 flying swords. Don't forget that there are thousands of demon beasts around us. If they all swarm him, he won't be able to defend against them. Frowning, the beautiful female cultivator asked, What should we do then? Let's make use of this time to recuperate and recover our combat strength. Listen to my orders later on. The blue-robed man said in a deep voice. Everyone nodded. Before he finished his sentence, another 100 demon beasts lunged forward. This time round, the 100 demon beasts were smarter and split into 3 different directions, charging towards Suzimo. A look of mockery flashed through Suzimo's eyes as he extended his finger and tapped forward gently. Go. Out of the 27 flying swords, 24 were separated. The 6 flying swords formed a group and streaked through the air, leaving sword scars one after another. The blue-robed man's expression changed as he exclaimed, "Sword formation. It's a sword formation. Ah, he's a sword formation master." For hexagonal sword formations hovered in midair, shimmering with a bedazzling light and buzzing. Sword chi was like frost as they blocked the 100 demon beasts in front of them. Poof! Poof! Blood mist spewed everywhere. The severed limbs of many demon beasts flew everywhere, dyeing the voids red. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.